from the aviation community. We've also gotten input from local pilots. We ran this by administration, ran it by county council, and even ran it by my good friend Amory Lovins. And I got some really good input from Amory on improving the document. And all in all, I've gotten, touch wood, just no negative responses. There have been discussions amongst the pilots in terms of like what would be better in terms of the recommendations, but the overall response that we've gotten from the local community as well as from the aviation community has been resoundingly positive. So what we're here for today is to describe to you in an executive fashion what the gist, what the core of the recommendations are, and then two, to respond to any questions that you have regarding any of the particulars of what we're provided so far. In your packets today, the agenda summary, the AIS, prepared by Dan, is at page 3. At page 6 is the policy that was prepared largely by me and then reviewed by others in accordance with the general documentary requirements of the county. The actual report begins at page 10. And at page 27, you have the GAO report from 30 years ago that was referenced. So those are the documents that we'll be talking
Turn that
about.
screen on.
Great, thanks, Barry. Some technical things. First of all, I want to apologize. I had a little technical issue and couldn't get back here as quickly as I thought. Totally my fault, and I'm sorry to keep you all waiting. Is Steve on?
Yes.
Steve is on.
He is. Okay, we just don't. Now I see him. Okay, there he is. All right. Great. Okay, to move forward, for my benefit, thank you, Barry, would you please introduce your associates here?
I'll be happy to do so. To my right, we have Daniel Baker. Daniel Baker is a local pilot. He lives here in the community as well as elsewhere. He is one of the co-founders of an application known as Flight Aware, something that consumers and businesses and others use in very successful operation in terms of keeping track of what's in the air and when it's going to get from here to there, and he can give better details on that. To his right is Tyson, your left, is Tyson Weiss. He's another member of this community. They're both pilots. Tyson himself is the co-founder of, what do we call that thing? ForeFlight, and that's an app that's used by pilots, not just for flight planning, but also in the cockpit in terms of weather and navigation and safety issues. And it's a fantastic product that was acquired by Boeing and is a very successful application and used by pilots throughout the planet, not just here.
Great, thank you. And Dan is here as well. Thanks for being here. And I'm playing catch up, so is there anything else we need to do before they launch into it?
No, I think
I would just add that after we hear these recommendations and deliberate, this will come to our board for adoption through a formal resolution.
Yes, on the 26th.
Thank you.
It was originally scheduled for the 12th, but because the 12th calendar agenda is so busy, we got kicked to the 26th, so we'll be back here then.
Okay.
But we hope that we'll have time to respond to any of the substantive questions that members of the board would have today.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
If there are no further questions, then I hand the gavel over towards the baton to Daniel Baker.
Thank you, Barry. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for your time. It's really an honor to participate in something that is so important, obviously, to this board, to the community, to the aviation industry, and to have the opportunity to have a positive impact. So I appreciate your time and your support of this committee. As Barry said, I'm a pilot and flight instructor. I've been flying in Aspen for about 20 years now. Most of my career, though, has been spent on the software and technology side. So FlightAware not only provides services, actually as a vendor to the county, you might recognize the maps from baggage claim provided by FlightAware, also operational decision-making tools to the airline operators in and out of here, as well as the FBO and the vast majority of all the business aircraft operators. So ties from both the operational side as well as the software and technology side is sort of my relationship with the industry. So you're familiar with the group that's put all this together, and I have the privilege of presenting the work that this group has done. It's been a considerable amount of effort, but it's fun to know that we have the opportunity to have such a big impact on aviation safety at Aspen. So as Barry mentioned, we've prepared, and you have the comprehensive document in front of you. It's about 20 pages with both background and specific recommendations. It was unanimously approved by the airport board just last month. And today my goal is to speak for probably about 20 minutes, a little bit more before Q&A, to provide some context and background to these recommendations. So you understand, what's the backstory, what is the level of interest from the committee, how are these things going to be accomplished, how difficult are they, and just give you a little more high-level information on it. But I want to be clear that what I'm presenting is not comprehensive of everything that's in that document. So if you haven't had the opportunity to examine it, I'd certainly appreciate it if you did. I also want to be clear that the committee feels very strongly that the FAA and the county have been working very hard on aviation safety for some time. There's no belief that all the stakeholders haven't been operating in the best interest. Our perspective is purely that, like everything in the world, there's opportunity for improvement. And so this is purely from a constructive and proactive perspective on how we can all work together to make aviation and the airport safer. So our recommendation document has about 24 proposals, almost all of which are in some form either educational, informational, or procedural. So none of the recommendations that we have put before you today involve any physical changes to the airport. Doesn't involve any new laws or regulation. They're very practical in nature, right? So none of these say we need to move the airport or lower the city or remove any mountains. It's pretty straightforward from that perspective. And we try to be as pragmatic as possible because our goal is to achieve these results in a very short period of time. So on this page, if you can see this slide, I've summarized essentially all of the 24 or 20 or so recommendations into 6 topics. And then I'm going to walk through these topics with some of the individual recommendations. So I'll start with pilot education and outreach. Among all the folks who are on the committee with me, we've really concluded that by far the largest opportunity to have an impact is pilot education. This includes outreach, generation and distribution of valuable information to pilots and to aircraft operators. So the bulk of these sub-recommendations, so each one of these is an individual recommendation that's in the document. They're all in this realm, and I've got a few slides so that we can dig a little bit deeper so you can understand what our goal is here. And we'd like to do these initiatives, these educational, informational, in conjunction with agencies that already do a great job at these. So an example is FAA, who's certainly supportive of this. They make videos. They obviously distribute content. The National Business Aviation Association, NBAA, they're the group that largely organizes community around business aircraft operators. That includes both private jets, charter aircraft, those sorts of things. There's also the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, that's AOPA. Really an emphasis on private pilots, on owner-operators of airplanes. Generally, they represent the prop planes that are flying out of here. And so between these organizations, we feel like we can reach the vast majority of folks who are operating in and out of there, out of this airport. We already engaged with a number of these organizations, broader than the list that I just mentioned, and they're keen to participate, both generate content, distribute content, and work with us and collaborate on that. We've also worked and spoken with Atlantic Aviation, the FBO operator on the field, and they're keen to participate as well as it relates to distributing valuable information to the pilots that fly in and out of here. They have a unique opportunity to do so. So I'm going to talk a little bit about charting. So for visual flight rules pilots, you've probably heard the term VFR. This is mostly single engine prop planes, quite a few of those in and out of the Aspen airport. This is the actual navigational map that is used by those pilots. You can see Aspen is the blue, it's a sort of blue icon in the middle with a dashed blue line around it. And this is called a sectional chart. And it has a number of features. So one of the main focuses is on airspace and location of airports, but also it's topographical, which of course is very relevant throughout the Rockies and certainly in Aspen. So if you look closely, you can see the airport. The little yellow sort of rectangle to the lower right of that is the city. And if you look very closely at the topographical nature of the chart, you can see that it gets lower to the northwest, and you're certainly familiar with sort of the down valley nature of this area. However, it's not super clear, right? If you're a pilot that hasn't been in here before, this is a pretty intimidating chart. There's lots of lines, and there's some challenges. And an example would be, let's say you're departing you need to go to the east, right? You're flying to the east coast in an airplane. What is the route from Aspen to the east coast out of here? It's not particularly clear what a good path is to do that. And if you might recall, there was a fatal accident in a Beechcraft Bonanza 2 years ago with this exact same challenge, right? They have this map. It's not clear, what the best way in and out is. There's kind of, some valleys if you go to the south. And so we feel like that's an opportunity for improvement. Here's an example of a charted VFR entry and exit route in Europe. So our recommendation is not to change the sectional chart. That's a standard fundamental thing that VFR pilots use in the U.S. and abroad. But in partnership with FAA, with CODOT, with navigational data providers, with application service providers, that we develop entry and exit routes departing and arriving Aspen. So it's common practice elsewhere in the world to have these sorts of routes, and they're depicted not only in maps, but on, for example, iPad apps and in cockpit, so that pilots can very quickly identify what the common routes are and load them into their aircraft for navigation. We feel very strongly that making these routes easy to see, easy to load, easy to understand will enhance safety for pilots.
Quick question.
Please.
Are these required in those other areas, those other geographic areas? Are they required, or is this an optional thing for the pilots?
Those are things that the nations have decided to implement at airports.
So it's a mandatory part of their kit.
Yeah, so pilots are expected to fly these. This is actually a depiction of the app that we created. And so the U.S., this would be the first implementation of this sort of navigational benefit in the United States.
And is that an FAA they would have to approve and?
The concept here is not that it would be required.
Right,
that
that's
it
what
would
I was
be
asking.
made available on an optional basis, on a voluntary basis. The system's a good system. Having maps like this, so pilots can follow them, required in Europe, would not be required here, but would be available for use. And there'd be a lot of jawboning in terms of, like, you want to be safe, use this. It's not required, it's voluntary, but it'll help you be safe and get where you're going.
Would
Copy
we
that.
need FAA's permission to make it voluntary?
Don't think so, but we will check with them on that.
So some of these depictions can be made advisory only and distributed. So there's a progression, which is one is development of this, and then distribution of it through a mechanism Daniel's going to describe that gets it available. And then the step beyond that is to actually have the FAA engage, or the CDOT engage in charting these, and they can then get put into navigational databases. That's a longer process.
Got to start somewhere, though.
That's right. And so fundamentally, the goal is not to, sort of to my first point, any new law, regulation, or mandatory action. But I think it's safe to say that if, for example, if hypothetically you have a new pilot flying in and out of Aspen for the first time, and you give them the option, right? You have this chart right here, and say, find your way from here to the northeast or this chart. Which would you prefer? And I think the reality is they would use both, right? You could there can be overlay technology, but the goal is what can we do that's practical, that's helpful, that can improve safety. And we believe that this can not only be created, but we can work with partner companies like ForeFlight, which Tyson created, and it's the de facto standard in aviation, to make it readily available to pilots. And so, one of the challenges with these is you can create some of the best tools and visualizations in the world. If people don't use them, then it doesn't have any impact, and it was largely a waste of time. If you went out to the airport today and started stopping pilots on the ramp and saying, what do you have on that iPad? Virtually everyone will say ForeFlight. So if the opportunity exists to take this data and get it in there to a push capacity where it largely just appears or is recommended for them to view, I'm confident it will save lives and it will reduce accidents at this airport. And I think this could be a model for something that's done elsewhere. There was a similar accident to the Aspen one in Telluride the summer before, and I think the same technology could apply there. It would just be terrific.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so this is largely, this particular focus is for, as I said, the VFR pilots. This is largely for prop planes. However, as you're certainly aware, there have been a number of incidents and accidents relating to business jets as well. The business jet world is a little bit different. The training is more formalized, it's more structured. It's rarely done in airplane, it's more done at professional pilot training facilities. And so what we'd like to do is work with these simulator training providers to incorporate Aspen-related scenarios into their training. I think the big challenge there, because I think everyone would agree, yeah, sure, we should have more Aspen training. The challenge is that when a professional pilot goes to one of these simulator facilities, there is a curriculum that has been put in place and certified and approved, and it's going to fill the time very efficiently, meaning if there's maybe 4 hours in the simulator and 16 hours on the ground, those 16 hours and 4 hours are chock full. There's not a lot of extra time that they're looking to fill with different things. However, we think there's an opportunity to take some of the training that's already being done and apply that to Aspen. So for example, if the training provider requires that the pilot does a single engine approach, meaning one of the engines has failed, this is a simulator scenario, into an airport to a missed approach, for example, can they do that at Aspen instead of at Memphis or JFK or sort of these simulator, mock airports? And the idea would be to present these scenarios not only so that pilots can become more proficient, but also to create awareness about the challenges of operating in and out of Aspen. I think those are two actually fundamentally different things that can play a role in safety. Now, as it relates to SkyWest, that's a little bit different. They do their own Aspen-specific training, and that's not necessarily what we're proposing changing here. What we're talking about is working with the three big flight training providers for corporate aviation. So that's Flight Safety, SimCom, and CAE. We've already spoken with them. They're keen to work with us. In particular, Flight Safety and SimCom we've had a number of calls with, and there's opportunities here. So what we're recommending is formalizing the relationship between those providers and a point of contact at the county, so that there's an ongoing relationship to ensure that the training is consistent. What is the availability? What types of crews, meaning types of airplanes and types of training, are receiving it? And that will give us some opportunities to measure the impact that we've had with these recommendations.
Hold on, just a question,
Please.
anybody?
I'm good.
I had another quick one. So are you proposing that all the simulator companies take a standard, like start using the Aspen approach as a challenging approach for all their trainings for anybody anywhere? Is that kind of the idea, to put it into their regular
That's right.
game app or whatever?
That's
whatever
right.
they
I
call
think
it?
where we think there's opportunities for a type of training that is mandatory per the curriculum, whether it be high altitude airports, night operations, whatever the requirement is that they've approved, we'd like to have that applied to Aspen rather than perhaps a less unique airport. And we think that'll touch a lot of pilots. If you think about the SkyWest crews that fly in and out of here do a tremendous amount of Aspen training, Aspen specific training, different scenarios. They're incredibly focused on Aspen. One of the challenges in business aviation is that you might have an aircraft that the crew hasn't ever been in here before. They come once a year, for example, unlike the SkyWest crews that might do multiple flights in and out of here a day. And so it's not practical that every pilot in the world gets, 8 days of Aspen training a year. But if we can touch these crews every 6 to 12 months, I think it can have a substantial impact. And there's ground opportunities as well to talk about, how crews prepare for weather and what's called runway analysis and runway performance, determining the takeoff and landing lengths. We'd like to just have Aspen be the example that they do for their practice, and I think it'll create more awareness about the uniqueness.
We had a conversation with SimCom, and they've already sent us a draft agenda on what their modified agenda would look like for their recurrent training that would include Aspen as a way to meet some of those requirements. As Daniel said, the FAA is very prescriptive about any change made to a training program, so they have to work in time in order to include
Right.
those things in their training.
Right. Patty has a
It
question. I
only
do.
furthers one of the key points of the GAO report about mountain flying for risks for GA, where they talk about half of the western states are all considered mountainous areas, and the statistics back in 1993 that show the rate of accidents, et cetera, overall in all the GA across the country, we're in mountainous regions. So it's a perfect opportunity for FAA to actually execute part of their report back in 1993.
I agree, and it touches on the next topic. You were talking about mountain flying. So there's an issue which is called density altitude. And fundamentally what that means is that aircraft performance, so the ability of an aircraft to accelerate, fly, climb, et cetera, decreases with altitude.
Where is that taken?
So that is that at Centennial or is that?
That one's actually Truckee.
Okay, so that's a
Oh, it's
Truckee.
Truckee.
Yep. And so the point is that it also decreases with higher temperature and with lower pressure. And so the result is that on the poorest performance for an airplane, it's the slowest it's going to climb, the slowest it's going to accelerate, the more difficult it is to stop, is on a hot summer day. It's particularly important for takeoff. And so that's called density altitude. And the density altitude is sort of the effective altitude, regardless of what the elevation is.
It's
So-
called throw people out of airplanes that day because the plane's too heavy to fly.
That's right. Yeah, that's the reason for that. And so, clearly the airlines are very cognizant of this, but we've seen issues both with business jets as well as prop planes. And they say, well, I know it's 7,800 feet, right? That's or 7,880 or something. That's the altitude of the airport. But what they may underestimate is the additional impact of density altitude. And so the effective altitude of the Aspen airport could be 10, 11,000 feet when they think it's closer to 7,000 or 8,000 feet. And this affects prop planes and jets alike. There is less air for the engines. There's less air over the wings. And so what we'd like to do is incorporate a lot of education around this into the information that we distribute, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be the pamphlets from Atlantic Aviation. We'll also recommend signage, this kind of digital signage at the departure end of runway 33 to display the effective altitude and make pilots cognizant of that. And I think this could be a factor in the fatal Bonanza accident here 2 years ago.
How quickly does that density altitude change in a 24-hour period of time?
It goes up and down very quickly. Sort of the big challenge you have is just like when the temperature rises here dramatically, the difference between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. could be thousands of feet.
Because I know Truckee's not at 9,400. They're at their normal, their real elevation. They're lower than that. So.
Yep.
You can get 2,000 and 3,000 foot swings in a day, depending on how much the temperature swings.
Is there a chart that displays that? That would be interesting just to see the variation at ASC in a day.
Yeah.
Or over a week.
I'm certain we could put that together. And
Summer, spring, summer, fall, winter,
we could certainly put that together. It's really it's really only a big issue in summer in my perspective. And I think there's a couple takeaways. One is be cognizant of your aircraft performance. Number two is as it relates to the Bonanza accident, you might say, well, we're going to circle for longer, or we're going to reevaluate our climb profile. And the sign is too late for this. This is my last point, but the difference between departing at, for example, 6:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. is tremendous, right? Because the temperature can drop 15 degrees, 20 degrees, and the opposite is true, of course, in the morning, right? The difference between departing at 7:30 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. can be tremendous. Yeah. So moving on to airspace, we have some recommendations relating to airspace around the Aspen Airport. If you're not familiar, airspace is how government defines sort of the 3D space in the skies above us, as rules, requirements, regulations, how they manage airplanes, how air traffic control operates. And so Aspen's considered Class D airspace. And the specifics I can get into if you'd like, but I'm going to make a couple points that'll probably answer some of those questions around this. But there's a couple issues with that, both as it relates to what the air traffic control tower thinks about it, as well as the physical design. So I'll give you a little information here. So this map right here is showing the Class D airspace. So you can see the blue circle around the center. That's Aspen's airspace. So you can see it extends a little bit past the city, into the mountains on both sides, and then to the north and northwest of the airport. But we believe that it can be improved in consideration of the unique arrivals and departures into Aspen. So, for example, the standard approach into Aspen begins somewhere near Red Table Mountain, which is a navigational aid that you can see on the north side of the map. It then crosses Triangle Peak to the south, and then it lands at the Aspen Airport. And what you'll notice is that virtually none of the approach is in Aspen's airspace. It's not controlled by the Aspen TRACAB, as they call it.
And is that a 5 mile diameter? Is
Yes,
it
5
limited by
statute miles.
5?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
So there's no custom design, although there could be. So I'll show you an interesting example here. And I apologize, I didn't invent the colors. I'm just screenshotting here, so they're a little difficult to see. But this is Eagle Airport. And if you'll notice, it kind of has the circle in the middle, and then it has little extra areas off to the side. And those protected areas are so that the Eagle Tower has additional airspace to protect the arrival and departure corridors. We think that's a terrific idea, and that's something that should be applied to Aspen. And Eagle has more operations in both directions versus Aspen's largely one way in, one way out. So it wouldn't even be quite as complex as Aspen. But I have another interesting example. This is Santa Barbara Airport in Southern California. It's a Class C airport, which is actually what we're recommending for Aspen. And typically, Class C has two circles around it. In the case of Santa Barbara, though, what they've done is they've recognized the terrain and the mountains, and they've modified the Class C airspace to make sense for the airport and the community and the environment, so that arrivals and departures are protected, but the airspace makes sense for the community, which is really relevant to Aspen, which is even in a more mountainous area. What we'd like to do, and what we've recommended, is replace the Class D airspace with Class C airspace. So have a little more requirements for aircraft operating in the area. Nothing that's, in my opinion, onerous for aircraft owners or operators, and the vast majority would be in compliance. This is typical of a mid-sized city, but it would enable Aspen Air Traffic Control to protect and control the airspace on approach and departure better. As I said before, the Air Traffic Control Tower is in favor of this recommendation, and we could have some unique design that would make a lot of sense for how the kind of idiosyncrasies of the Aspen Airport.
We've also had
How would it take so
conversations.
long, 3 to 5 years?
The FAA engages in a pretty significant safety study just to first they try to understand whether or not the airport qualifies based on the rules that they have for that airspace. There's a safety study that's done. One of the big benefits that comes with a transition to a Class C airspace is the tower actually gets more technology. So they have to understand how that technology is going to impact operations. For example, in Class C airspace, they can use radar separation so they can see the target on the screen. At Aspen today, they have to use binoculars to visually identify the airplane before they can, for example, release an aircraft on the wrap procedure. So they do a lot of study to make sure that all the upgrades that they're going to do fit, and they have to coordinate with the airspace above them, with the centers that control that. So there's a lot that's involved there. The good news is we've gotten support for this move from both the major associations, the National Business Aviation Association and AOPA. I'm actually on the board of NBAA, and so there is industry support for this, but they will have to go through that standard review. And there's also a public rulemaking that happens as a result, where they have to get comments on the transition of airspace.
It's well deserved for the Aspen Airport. It makes a lot of sense. I think the reason it hasn't happened thus far is due to the seasonal nature of the airport. And the FAA does a lot of analysis of, how many flights per year does an airport have, which is a good, in general, way of analyzing how busy an airport is. But really, I think what we can make a case for that they've been receptive to is, here are the busy days, and that's what matters, right? It doesn't matter if you have too much technology on a not busy day. What you need to have is the appropriate amount of technology for the traffic on peak days around Aspen. And I think Aspen is very unique in having an extreme range of flights per day, right? It could have as few as, on a decent weather day, then off season, it could be 6 or 8 flights. On a busy day, it could be hundreds.
There are also some things you don't hear about in some of these safety reports, which is due to our airspace, there are an increasing number of what are called TCAS RAs, which is aircraft are equipped with sensing equipment to understand whether or not they're aiming at one another and whether or not there would be a collision. When that happens, the systems alert the pilots and they direct the maneuver for the pilot to take to avoid an air-to-air impact. Aspen has had a few more of those as traffic has gone up, and so there's a recognition that this sort of upgrade would help eliminate these TCAS RAs, because those are the sorts of things that the FAA wants to avoid.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And I think not only are we concerned about, air to air, certainly that is a huge safety concern, but this is also a factor for pilot workload, right? And so let's say TCAS avoids an accident, but now the pilots have been distracted for 45 seconds as they descend into the Aspen Airport when they would prefer to be focusing on their approach. And so anything that we can do that simplifies the towers with more automation, so they can focus on taking care of airplanes, the pilots, they can focus on flying the takeoff or the landing, is time and money well spent.
Right. Kelly has a question.
Yeah,
Please.
to understand this a little better. So
The change in the airspace configuration would allow air traffic control to move planes in a bigger area, so there's further spread out. Is that
Right. Basically, the area that they would have authority over would be larger and more sensible for the orientation of the approach to Aspen, so that they could not have to deal with aircraft that are perhaps transiting the area but not landing at Aspen and not talking to them. So they could have more control, have more organization, have more automation, and more technology, so they could essentially spend less time dealing with problems and confusion, and spend more time dealing with traffic in an orderly manner.
So does this affect like the actual approaches that get taken? Does that give a bigger
That's not part of this
number
recommendation.
okay.
We do have a recommendation relating to that, though.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
One thing this does is it helps the tower keep planes that are on IFR approaches on the approaches. This recommendation actually first came from tower personnel here at our airport several years ago, because they have the experience of planes that are transiting the airspace beyond 5 statute miles, beyond Triangle Peak, up over Basalt Mountain or up over Red Table or crossing over the town of Basalt, and then 360 degrees around, but mostly to the northwest is where the issues come up. Those planes don't need to be talking to air traffic control. And so if it's legal for them to be flying through that airspace and not talking to air traffic control. So if they're blasting along, or sometimes they've canceled an IFR trip and they're going to try to get in here really fast so that they can make whatever time schedule they've got to make, air traffic control, the guys in the tower, the guys and gals in the towers have to break planes off the approach to get them out of the way of the planes that are coming in not talking to anybody until they're 5 miles out. So what the expansion, what's the principal change from my perspective, a simple GA pilot's perspective, is I need to be talking to air traffic control before I enter Class Charlie airspace, Class D or Class C airspace. I need to be talking to air traffic control before I enter the airspace. The good thing about Class C is it's further out.
Right, it's
So
bigger.
it gives the tower more, and the approach controllers, more control over the airspace, where all of our traffic, for the most part, is coming in and going out, which makes it safer, because what it allows them to do is maintain separation, which is FAA speak for keeping planes from running into each other.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Makes way too much sense.
I want to make sure we're on track here. We're at 1:40 almost. We've got another 20 minutes. How much more do you have?
We got a few more. I'll hustle through these.
Okay, great.
So we'd like to talk about basic, how wind is reported and measured. Wouldn't come as much surprise that one of the biggest factors that's considered for takeoff or landing is wind. This is particularly important at Aspen because of the nature of the airport. Means that it's one way in, one way out, and you're not always able to take off into the wind or land into the wind, which is preferable. And you have a combination of suboptimal winds at sometimes, as well as density, altitude, as well as terrain. And so all those factors make wind particularly important and challenging at the Aspen Airport. So the committee recommends that we deploy and evaluate additional wind sensors as well as technologies so that we can obtain and provide the most accurate wind information to pilots. In consideration of all these challenges at the Aspen Airport, it makes sense that the airport has the best wind analysis and reporting technology that's available in the industry. In the recommendation, we have several different proposals on how to move forward with this, but we'd also like to recommend evaluating the use of a system here that's called instantaneous winds. So in general, when air traffic control provides winds to the pilot, which is done at takeoff or landing. So if you receive a landing clearance or a takeoff clearance, the winds are always included. That's not unique to Aspen, that's everywhere. The challenge is that the winds are generally provided, virtually always provided, as a 2-minute average. So there's wind analysis technology. You average that out, and then the wind is provided based on what is the average wind over 2 minutes. That gives you a good sense of what's going on. And that wind report can include gusts. So you could say the wind is 320 at 10, peak gusts 15, which means in the last 2 minutes, that was the average. 10 was the average wind, and 15 was the strongest gust. There's this system in place at Aspen called instantaneous winds, which is a 3-second average of winds. And this was designed because of the really variable nature of winds here, right? Winds can change very rapidly. They can gust. There can be a lot of changes in winds. And people were concerned that if the 2-minute average was really good for takeoff or landing, but suddenly the winds had changed, it became necessary to issue pilots a warning and say, well, here's the standard winds, but here's the instantaneous winds as kind of an alert that things are getting rapidly worse. The problem is that this is largely being used for the opposite now, which is maybe the 2-minute average for winds is unacceptable for takeoff or landing, but the 3-second winds, the instantaneous winds, are acceptable, and those are being provided as well. The NTSB report about the Hawker overrun that was last winter or 2 winters ago does cite these instantaneous winds as a contributing factor to the accident. So we'd like to recommend that the county evaluates if this is appropriate, how these can be used, how risks can be mitigated, and we'd like to incorporate the ATC, FAA, and other stakeholders to evaluate if this, how this can be improved, because we don't want to see another accident where instantaneous winds are cited, particularly because they're unique to Aspen.
Do you know, you might want to talk to the Aspen Skiing Company, because I know they have wind sensors at the top of Aspen Mountain. I'm not sure about Highlands, Buttermilk, or Snowmass. But when Brett and I were up there, that was the first thing you noticed at the gondola building, and they run them all the time.
Yeah.
And that's just an opportunity
We need to understand the winds happening at the runway level.
Yeah.
And good news on that issue is that ATC's already made some policy changes with respect to how those are issued, but there's more to be done and evaluated there.
Just as far as overall wind censoring, it's an opportunity that's already existing, so.
Yep, wind's a big opportunity. Another one is instrument approaches. Kelly was touching on that a moment ago. These are the procedures that jet aircraft use for arriving and departing the area. The one on the right here is the localizer DME Echo. It's the most common approach that's publicly available to jet pilots. The goal of this approach is to guide airplanes to a low altitude near the runway and oriented towards the runway. It also allows you to fly into the area when you can't see the runway, and it will orient the airplane to be in a position that it can safely land. That's fundamentally the goal. You've probably heard and experienced as passengers alike that it can be a pretty steep approach into the Aspen airport. It can be pretty complex. It can be taxing on pilots. So I created this chart to give you a sense of the descent rate required to land from the end of an instrument approach. I included Denver, Telluride, Eagle, and Aspen. So Denver, relatively flat land, even though it's at 5,000 feet, and then 3 mountain airports. So what you can see is that it requires more than double the descent rate of Aspen to get from the localizer DME Echo approach into the runway 15, and then 60 to 75% higher descent rate than Eagle and Telluride, which are clearly mountain airports as well that have their own challenges. You'll also notice that Aspen is the only airport where the approach doesn't include a runway number. The other ones have the runway number at the end there, and that's because the approach is so steep that it actually doesn't meet the requirements to be considered what they call a straight-in approach. So clearly this is a pretty unique situation, a unique approach. We've been discussing the feasibility of a brand new GPS approach, and we'd like to have the county work and continue to work with NBAA, FAA, and others to accelerate and publish this new approach that will allow a more stable approach into the airport. I think the conversation that we've been having in the committee is not so much about how low can airplanes get or can they land in really bad weather. The concern that I see really, and I think this is shared by everyone in the committee, is we want the approach to be stable and easy to execute, well documented, and enable a lot of the automation in the airplane, so the pilots don't have to do anything difficult or complex. It should be as straightforward as possible. The localizer DME Echo does not use the GPS technology that airports have been using for the last decade or two, and we think that by embracing that technology, we can make it much easier for pilots to fly in here, and there's a relationship between how easy it is and the safety.
Does that require the ATC to have corresponding technology in the tower for that, or is this just specific to every?
It's procedural, and it's the procedure can be provided to the pilots. The tower will certainly need to be aware of what the aircraft are doing, but it's leveraging existing GPS technology that's deployed both in space as well as on aircraft. So it's largely this what they call an approach plate. It would be a new procedure that's provided to pilots to fly.
These
there
new
a noise
approaches would
impact?
require FAA approval,
Right.
and would be designed in concert with the FAA, but would not require new technology in the tower.
You asked about the noise impact.
Noise.
The benefit of the new procedure that we've been talking to the FAA about is it creates a constant descent. So instead of airplanes having to level off and throttle up, they just can largely remain at idle to fly down. So At least further out, it should be quieter.
And Greg, so I have two more, so I think we're,
Yeah.
That's good, yeah.
we're making good progress. So departure procedure, because of the way that Aspen is designed, I've touched on this a number of times, it's a one-way in, one-way out airport. And so Aspen has a unique procedure called the WRAP, where departing aircraft, as soon as they take off, make a right turn as soon as they can, and then do a climbing left turn behind the traffic. So this procedure works pretty well, and it's depicted here where you can see the yellow plane is the departure and the red plane is the arrival. The problem is that most departure procedures, by standard, the turns do not occur until 400 feet. So if you're departing Denver, if you're departing New York, anywhere in the country or in the world, 400 feet is when you begin that turn. And so we can run into challenges here where pilots will, by default, not begin that turn until 400 feet or not understand that they need to do that turn. And so air traffic control, you'll often hear them telling pilots, are you in the turn? Please begin your turn. And they're having to constantly monitor and correct when there are deviations, which is problematic and stressful.
So what is it here? It's 400 feet in standard, but
So
this
it's
is
400 feet of standard, and what they'd like for you to do here is turn as soon as it's safe and practical to do so. So I've included this is the actual procedure that a pilot sees. And I won't read the whole thing, but it begins, and it says climb heading 343 to 9100. That is the right turn. And it's not very clear, because if I'm a pilot who hasn't been here before and I'm reading it, climb heading 343 to 9100, at first glance to me might mean keep going straight to 9,100 feet and then a climbing left turn. That's how I read this procedure without really digging into it. So that's the problematic section right there. Let's take a look at Eagle. So this is the Eagle Airport, and they say begin a climbing left turn as soon as practicable, but no later than the departure end of the runway heading 206. That's super clear to me, right? That not only what I need to do, but it's catches my attention that this is abnormal. I need to do this. This is a procedure that's important. So we'd like for the county to work with FAA to improve the language, and this is an example. On top is the current language, and on the bottom is different language. And there's no commitment to this language in particular, but let's do a call out. This is a simple one-line change that I think people can get behind to make it more clear to people that they need to be in the turn as soon as possible. And I'm sure FAA has experts that can work on language that conforms to how they write these procedures.
They'll probably question as practicable.
I stole that from the Eagle language, but made it sound more official, so
Yeah.
it's approved. All right, so I think the last one here, actually I'd like to defer to Barry to speak to this one a little bit if you're willing, but it's essentially how we can move things forward on an ongoing basis and ensure there's momentum beyond the committee. Do you mind, Barry?
I don't. One of the things that's really noticeable about the GAO report from 30 years ago is it made a bunch of great recommendations, and most of them were not implemented, or they were implemented in some sort of haphazard catch-as-catch-can way. And 30 years later, a lot of them are still great recommendations, but they were never implemented. And we do not want the work that we've done to wind up being 20 pages that wind up on the credenza and not being implemented. And we think that the reason for the lack of implementation of the GAO recommendations, many of them, was that the various organizations that were involved wound up not tasking specific individuals or departments with saying, this is your job to make these recommendations a reality. Now, we've got Dan Bartholomew and Diane Jackson here with us today, and they're busy full-time running the airport. So if we just said, okay, do everything that you're doing right now, and by the way, get all this stuff done, go with God, it would be unfair to them, and there would be a question as to whether it's actually going to be implemented. So there are 3 stages of this. One is the conceptual, which we're hopefully finished with now. The first phase of this is coming up with ideas, which we hope are good ideas and will be accepted and approved by you so that we can go forward. And then the next stage is to be working for the task force to be working with Dan and Diane over the course of the, say, next 6 months or so during the rest of this budget year and with our aviation partners to ramp up these recommendations to actually get the ball rolling. But in the long term, starting in the next fiscal year, our recommendation to you is that you have an employee of the county. Now, there's some discussion whether it be a contract person or an employee, whether it be full-time, part-time, all of that. Those are things to be discussed with airport administration, to be discussed with Dan and Diane in terms of like how that would best fit into the organizational structure of the management of the airport. But there needs to be a person whose job is to make these things happen and to keep bird dogging these things and to move them along, because we fear that as happened with the GAO recommendations from 30 years ago, that if the county doesn't have a person whose job is to try to help make these recommendations a reality, that it won't happen, or it'll happen not as well as it could otherwise.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for the time.
Yeah,
for your
sure.
support.
Is that it? Is that the
That's it.
pres? Okay, questions from the board? Kelly?
This is all very clear, thank you. I'm wondering, would you or have you prioritized implementation of these?
I don't think that we have. We, as it relates to recommendations in general, we definitely looked at both the impact that it would have and the practicality, and we tried to focus our 24 recommendations on the easiest to impact, easiest to deploy, and that would have the greatest impact. And so that's our goal. They're all relatively score very high in that nature. Certainly we could come up with 100 more, some of which would be much more expensive and much less impactful.
Sure, okay.
There is some discussion, if I may, of that at your packet, page 12, that this is a constellation of recommendations. It's hard to organize them in a linear fashion as to what needs to be done first. That being said, the most salient issue right now for us, something that could be addressed right away, is the winds issue. Dealing with this instantaneous wind issue, getting that going, and then two, talking about can we get more sensors out there on the field to get better information about the wind situation to the pilots. The second one is the pursuit of the initiatives for the stabilized approaches. For these new specialized approaches that can be rolled out utilizing the new technology. And the third most important recommendation is what I refer to as the panoply of recommendations in terms of safety outreach, getting the educational materials out there to the pilots who not the local pilots, but the pilots who only fly in here 2 or 3 times a year. So working with Flight Safety, working with AOPA, working with NBAA, working with the Colorado Pilots Association to get those things out there. So that's the organization in terms of priority.
We do have some good traction on getting the ball rolling on some of these items. The FAA has escalated the development of what we're calling the new RNAV 1.5 procedure. We had a call with them yesterday about that. So that's good news. They expect a draft of that in the first quarter of next year. And it will take some time to implement that.
And I'm sorry, is that the departure approach or
That's the instrument approach. That's
Okay.
basically grooming the slope instead of leaving the moguls on it, is what I would describe it as. So they are very excited about the fact that that's been promoted. We mentioned that there was the operational change with the issuance of WINs already, I think, as a result of knowing the report. So we are seeing the wheels in motion on some of these items.
Patty?
What about starting the process, the 1 to 3 to 5 year process of changing from D to C? Should we maybe start kicking that into?
That's another thing. If it's approved if that recommendation is approved by the board, then we can sit down with Dan and generate a letter that gets sent to the air.
Just to start it.
That says, we approve this, please start it. Kyle Gelroth told me today that the tower is already assembling the materials that they need to send to the mothership at FAA to start the ball rolling. So all they need from us is evidence of community support for this, which is one of the factors that the FAA looks to when it's deciding whether to change the airspace classification for a particular airport. So that kind of thing could be done within get that ball rolling within a couple of weeks.
And Greg, just real quick, because I know Steve has his hand up. Again, I just think that we have this 1993 document in our hand, and I think it's great for us to be able to utilize that to take to FAA and say, these great recommendations you made 30 years ago, let us help you put those into action at our airport. And that we've already referenced your document and helping us move these things forward. And that would be a win-win for them because they'd finally have somebody who's actually going to heed this document and move it forward. And I think that is something we can use to our advantage.
That precisely is one of the recommendations that we've made, is moving forward with the FAA and others to try to implement the recommendations that are as yet unfulfilled or not totally fulfilled.
It's their
in
own
the GAO
document. How can
report.
they argue with us, right?
One of the nice aspects of this would be something where we would actually be partnering with the FAA in something that we all agree on, that safety is really important instead of being adversarial or not of one mind. So it would be refreshing in that, and hopefully maybe that attitude or that atmosphere would spill out into other areas of discussion.
A question from Steve. You're muted still.
You're muted.
Hang on, Steve.
Nope.
All right, hold on just a sec.
We can't hear you, Steve. Hold on a sec.
She's working on it.
Technology, I love it.
Keep talking, though, so we can tell when it works.
Okay,
There we go.
There you go.
can you hear me now?
We
Yeah,
got
how
you.
are you?
We're good.
Good point,
Okay.
Greg.
I really like these recommendations. I definitely don't want this to be a study or recommendations that collect dust on someone's shelf and don't get put into effect. They all make sense to me. A question for Dan. Do you have anybody on staff who could take over the task of being the safety person right now? Well, I presume it eventually would be another probably full-time position, but maybe we could get started with a person doing it part-time right away.
Yeah, we really do not have anybody on staff that would have the bandwidth. We're pretty, yeah, I'm just trying to think through if we have anybody. No, everybody's pretty full schedule. It'd fall on Diane or myself right now, if anybody, and we're pretty bogged down
Okay,
as
so
well.
it probably would be putting out, advertising a position and bringing somebody new on in
Or-
order to do
or
that.
Or a
consult-
contract
contract in
position
the
of some
interim.
sort.
Contract, okay. Another question, going to a Class C airport designation seems like a really good idea to me. And the FAA people from the tower are behind it. Why would it take so many years to put it into effect? Why, if it's that good of a thing, it should be like a fast track thing, it seems to me, and get it done faster.
Yeah.
Maybe you talked about that and maybe I missed it in the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, so, one thing to consider, of course, is that this is not an obligation that the county would have to actually do themselves. So, this, group is not actually the bottleneck there. On the 3 to 5 years, I'm an optimist, and I agree with you also. So I'm optimistic that 3 years is the fast track. It requires a number of studies, analysis to determine how the airspace is going to interact, because the airspace is three-dimensional, and there's aspects of Aspen, there's Denver kind of on top and on all sides of it, there's Eagle on the other side, and then there's what they call satellite airports, like Rifle, for example, and these all have to interact in a way that the controllers can seamlessly move traffic between them, and also there's charting and procedural issues that need to get drawn, tested, distributed to pilots, put on maps and airplanes, and so it's a pretty substantial process. I think, could it be done quicker? Yes. Do I think that means 6 weeks? I think a couple years would be a very quick, way to address it. But there's no time like the present to get started. Is my position.
That estimate actually came from the tower manager here at the Aspen Airport, and I'm sure that if there's an opportunity to accelerate that process, that we would take that opportunity to try to move things forward. But basically winds up, once the ball gets rolling, it's an FAA process, and the FAA, like every other federal administration, has certain bureaucratic paces and delays built into the process.
There's also a technology lag, which is they have to change the software in their aircraft traffic control systems. Software has to be loaded and tested in navigation databases. So there's a lot of things that change as a result of modifying airspace. So all those things take time to assemble.
So analysis, design, implementation, and testing, and then deployment. It's easy to see how that could take a couple years at least.
Right, thanks, Kelly.
I just wonder, are there other consequences to the community of changing the airspace?
There's some additional requirements. For example, the airplanes would need to have the ability to emit their position which is something that is required for both high altitude flight as well as flight near any major city, like Denver would be an example. So there could be some, if you have an airplane, for example, that has no electrical systems and no radios, you would need a waiver to fly in the airspace. Given the busyness of Aspen Airport currently, I'm not aware of any aircraft that wouldn't meet this requirement that are currently flying in and out of the Aspen Airport.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Anything else? I have a couple questions. So a lot of this would be voluntary and part of the pilots who adopt it, is what I hear. It's not required of them.
That's right.
So I had questions along those lines. So it's not a standard that the FAA is using now, some of these recommendations you're making. So the two-part question. One is, what's the likelihood, and 3 to 5 years sounds optimistic to me to get the FAA to do something, right? And then also I just wanted to know, are we talking about a specific project like your company's products? Is this part of a product pitch, or are we going to put out an RFP, or would it require an RFP if we're going to adopt a new technology? And is that us doing it, or is it a pitch to the FAA to do it? I'm just trying to figure out how all this fits, because I love the idea of adopting something new that's going to make us safer, but where do we fit into that?
The answer to that question is depends. Now, unpacking that, it's the exact procedure to follow with respect to these various recommendations varies according to what the recommendation is. For example, going to Class Charlie airspace, if we get a letter out to the FAA after hopefully this board approves these recommendations on the 26th of this month, we could get that letter out in perhaps 2 weeks' time. I'm just saying to the FAA, we support this, please start the process. And we could do that, and that's simple, that's easy. Now, with respect to getting the charted airspaces, these VFR airspaces in and out, that's something that we would have to noodle over the course, to use a technical term, to work with Dan and the other members of this group to talk about who would be making contributions to this, how the design work would be done, how it would be funded, and then coming up with a plan, a concrete plan. And for any one of those concrete plans that would involve any kind of financial commitment or investment by the county, we would come back to you on a project-by-project basis for approval of that before we move forward on it.
I'd also like to comment that I have no financial interest in any of this. The company I started, I sold and don't work there. And you can speak to your same situation.
Yeah, same. I would say the county has probably 3 roles. One is it's an advocate for the changes it wants to make. So it's just being the squeaky wheel. And I think that's one of the things that we've been able to provide as a squeaky wheel around some of these things. Second would be staff support in some fashion. And some of these actually may require county financial support. For example, it's an open question, for example, is if the wind sensor upgrade is something that would have to come out of the county budget, or it's something that in-car could receive grant funding for. That's one where we've gotten some input that it might be the county that has to put some chips in for something like that. So I think those are the 3.
I guess my question is that, why wouldn't the FAA be asking for this?
I beg your pardon?
Why wouldn't the FAA be asking for this if they know the concerns about safety with our current situation, changing the airport, upgrading, all the things?
When you say this, to what do you refer, sir?
Your recommendations here. Why is this being driven by you guys, and why isn't it being something the FAA is asking for?
I think the FAA has a wide array of responsibilities across aircraft certification, pilot training and certification, airport, both funding and air traffic control operations. And it's really incumbent upon the sponsors and owners of the airport to ask for it, either by implementing it themselves or pushing the FAA to do so. It's the squeaky wheel.
Okay. Yeah, I think why we're doing it is that the airport board decided a safety task force would be important to execute on the community vision. Okay. And then we're super passionate about raising
it's good to have you guys here. I'm grateful you're part of the community. The next question I have is cost details, budgets, devil's in the details. This obviously isn't part of our ongoing airport budget. This is a new budgetary item.
That is correct.
Yeah, and
we're not asking for any carte blanche with respect to, we could give you a number right now. It would just be a plug. It would be a swag, and so we're not doing that. And we've been very careful to state in the written materials that have been submitted to you that before any budget items or before we try to move forward on those, that Mr. Bartholomew and others and will be coming back to you saying, this is the plan, this is the project, this is what the commitment is, this is what we expect to get out of it in detail, and to get your approval before moving forward on any of those things.
Got it. I guess to follow up, I've got more questions, but just to kind of add on to that is how far from standard, FAA standard, are these recommendations for an airport of this size? I think you explained some of that, but I want to just make sure that question is addressed as we go forward.
If I could speak very
well, let me keep going. I've got more, and we're limited time, so
Right.
this may take longer. And are things like this of this higher precise technology, are they appropriate for this airport in the eyes of the FAA is the question. And maybe you've answered that, but I wanted to just put it out in a different form. And I may have one more. And then it just comes down to the aspirational things you put forth, which I love everything I hear. I'd love it if every pilot was trained, just the way I'd like every driver to know, the rules of the road. But we can't seem to mandate that. And I'm just wondering, what is do you have a fix on the likelihood that the FAA is actually going to follow recommendations from us on changing things that would be changing their entire program nationwide, is what I think I'm hearing from you.
Actually not, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's the recommendations that we have made would not require any major modifications to the national airspace. It would not require deviation from from the existing regulations that the FAA has in place that govern this airspace and how it is administered. These are all enhancements that would be on a voluntary basis. The FAA, coming back to what John Bauer has told us more than once, they're all about accessibility and they're all about safety. But their safety standards that they set, they're really minimum. They're minimums for across the nation. And we're doing something here that, we talk a lot about how we lead the nation, and sometimes we really do and other times we don't. So far as we can tell, no community anywhere in the United States has attempted to do what we're doing here, which is to take the basic level of safety that we have per the FAA regulatory framework and to see if on a voluntary basis it can be enhanced, it can be improved. Not to criticize it and say that it's bad, but just to make it better. And so how it's all going to turn out, we don't know at the end of the day. What we do know is that the response we've gotten from the aviation community and from very influential organizations in the aviation community and from the FAA people that we've been dealing with, it's all been positive.
And I'd like to add also that just by way of example, so Rifle Airport has far more sophisticated approaches published than Aspen Airport. Much smaller airport in terms of flights per day. And so this isn't about, a higher standard. This is about meeting, the same standard of nearby airports. There are airports that have fewer flight operations on a given day than Aspen that are Class C, which is the higher level of airspace than Class D. There are airports like our neighbors at Eagle that have a departure procedure that is far more clear, more explicit, and better worded. We're trying to meet that. We're not trying to create a new standard or to get out of the norm. We're trying to be at the level that is appropriate for Aspen. I think it's safe to say that it doesn't really make sense that Rifle has far more sophisticated high-tech approaches than Aspen Airport.
Copy that. I've got another question here from Steve, I see.
Well, just more a comment. I think a lot of the times that the FAA waits until there's a airplane crash before they make safety improvements. They study the crash, what caused it, and then they make safety improvements. I don't want to follow that approach here to making safety improvements. I don't want to wait for another crash somewhere to give us the inspiration and the to make these improvements.
Yeah.
We have all of the expertise from our safety committee making these recommendations, and to me that's enough for us to go ahead, and we hope that the FAA follows along on us doing these recommendations.
Steve,
I
appreciate
I think by making adopting the recommendations and sending some of these requests up, that gets the attention. Related to Steve's comment about doing some things before there's an accident, I think this development of a new procedure that comes into Aspen is a big benefit that is in advance of that. It's also at the intersection of some developments technologically with respect to navigation technology that makes that possible. And raising this to the FAA and having that discussion, the light bulb sort of went on that they can design a procedure that's a little bit more unique than as a result of all the satellite-based technology improvements. So we're doing a mix of both. You know, so the winds-related issues, you know, we're worried about whether or not that has an impact and creates an accident where there actually is a fatality. We've been lucky so far, I think, with the recent incidents. But some of these things we're trying to get ahead of.
And to Steve's point and to Greg's concern as well, I'd like to say that as it relates to budget, certainly we're trying to be very practical in things that can be done quickly, easily, and for little or no expense. There is an expense when there's an accident at the airport, right? And so that is not in the budget, right? Having an airplane overrun or having an accident that closes the airport for days. And that is both an expense to the county and it's also a loss of revenue to the county. And so from my perspective, I am wholly confident that these recommendations, if implemented, will prevent accidents, prevent incidents, save lives. And there's no question in my mind about that. And as a byproduct of that, not my primary focus, but as a byproduct of that, it will save money to the county and also keep the airport open and running. And so I think that's substantial, particularly in light of the minimal cost for these recommendations.
Right, thank you. Dan, what do you need from us today?
So I guess really what we need from you today is just a recommendation to start moving these forward and evaluating them at a more prescriptive level, start to gather costs, things such as that. And to go back to the budget a little bit, being an enterprise fund, one way or the other, it'll have to come out of that fund if there are some costs to the airport, and that'll come out of, and these are textbook airfield costs. So it'll go into raising landing fees, adding to a field foliage fee, or adding to patio shelter fees, whatever they happen to be. We'll have to find them someplace. So we can't just make them up. So we'll have to find the money somewhere.
Don't you need us to formally adopt this, though, on the 26th before we can give you that direction?
And there is a one-read resolution that has been prepared or is in the course of being prepared, but it should be in your agenda packet for the 26th.
And will that be for public comment?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know much, I really don't know anything about the FBO conversation, but how is this going to affect a future FBO contract?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. It won't, there's nothing contingent upon the contractor to be
Can't
doing
talk
anything.
about it.
Not at all. If it winds up being Atlantic, right, then we'd work with Atlantic. If it winds up being somebody else, the county or another operator, as has been suggested, we'd work with them.
Right.
But it's
Their
it's-
budget,
it's-
I was
it's-
just thinking budgetary concerns.
This is, in terms of,
Unless they want to help pay for it.
it's standalone, they're totally separate.
Okay, thank you.
Financially
Just wanted
as well as
to
conceptually.
toss that out because it occurred to me that if the cost paradigm is going to change.
Oh, it's the right question.
It's unrelated. I did mention the FBO, and just to be clear, the extent of what they've offered to do is to staple a briefing form or a map or something on top of a paid invoice or receipt that someone receives, so that they can have that in front of them, perhaps with some local information. That's just
what-
their interest in safety.
That's what they
Atlantic.
did.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we can't give you a vote today.
No.
We can kind of suggest that you move forward with a thumbs up or something.
Well, we'll bring it back to us on the 26th, and we'll think you know where we're going to be headed.
Yeah, Greg, I think today was if there were any outstanding questions that may cause the board to reconsider adoption on Monday and/or any suggested revisions, we wanted to have that opportunity in a work session prior to bringing it to you in a regular meeting.
Yeah, I just would say I would expect to see some of this in the budget, I guess, based on our adoption.
Yeah, I would like to see some rough cost estimates for the budget, and we can run them through a model that allows us to allocate.
So
them.
We have a
this
couple months for that.
We do,
but-
yeah.
The commitment.
Space reserved in the budget.
The commitment of the task force to you is that we will continue to keep meeting. In fact, when this was originally scheduled for the vote tomorrow, we scheduled the next task force meeting on Thursday, and we will meet on Thursday. And on the come, fingers crossed, we're going to be discussing in the task force how we move forward should we get approval from you on the 26th. And then our commitment is to work assiduously between now and 2024 with Dan and Diane to take these concepts and to have actual action plans to make them all real, to actually get them so that when the budget comes back to you for approval for 2024, you'll be able to see it in detail.
Well, thank you.
Right.
There's definitely value added here, and, you know, even just in the ongoing relationship building with the air traffic control tower, which has always seemed like a pretty opaque place. So I'm grateful for that relationship building that you're all doing. Thank you.
Great, thanks for coming today.
Thanks for your time and support.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. See you on the 26th.
We'll see you on the 26th.
Okay. Anybody need a break? Are we ready to keep
No, we are
flying?
already behind. I think we should get moving.
I
All
will
right.
need one after this, though, to run to I might just run to the restroom.
Yeah, sure.
Fine.
Okay, I'm gonna queue up, Ashley's here. And she's to give us the AI's housing update.
Before I get yelled at.
Right, I was trying to.
How'd your chat with Eleanor go?
Those are sunglasses.
I'll grab it. Thank you so much.
Hasty, you know,
Thank you. Good to see you.
recycle, and I couldn't make the bloody thing work.
So polar bears today, not ladybugs?
Okay, welcome Ashley, nice to see you.
It's great to see you all. Let me just get my slides up here for you. Okay. Hi,
Hi.
I'm Ashley Pearl. I'm the Community Resiliency Manager for Picken County. And I'm excited to be here because this is the first time since I joined the county and started to be one of your designated staff members working on housing that we've been able to take kind of a larger strategic approach to housing. So we've been referring to this presentation as staff as kind of the all things housing update. Of course, it won't be all things. Thank you. But we're hoping to kind of take a bird's eye view here today and then dive in a bit deeper into community housing. So we're talking today just about housing for the community, not necessarily housing for our employees as Picken County. So the purpose of today is I'm going to give an overview of community housing, kind of the background and the shifting landscape. And we're going to introduce this idea of a housing plan. Staff took a stab at something really just to create a discussion item. So I'm hopeful we can have some discussion today. And then I identify where we go from here and what follow-up and what more the board needs. But really the purpose of today is to put something out there to allow you all to have a conversation amongst the board about all the different housing tactics that are available to you and how you'd like to use your designated housing money. We've been referring to it as the $5 million of general fund money that you all put aside for this year to put towards housing. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to jump right into the background. So we all know that housing is a struggle right now, potentially the biggest struggle for our community members, our families, and our businesses. We talk about it as it's not just affordability, it's availability, if you can even find something, and as accessibility. So if you can find something and you can afford it, you might not have the right access credentials depending on your situation in life. This is a problem. It used to be a problem just for certain income levels, but I think we all know, and we've seen the data, that it's a problem and it's a real challenge for anyone working or trying to, retired, that's trying to be here in Picken County. It's not necessarily just something that's plaguing certain income levels. If you are working in our community, you probably can't afford housing in our community. But we continue as Picken County we've done a lot towards the housing issue, and we continue to pursue a lot of efforts to address it. And the reason I'm here today with a smile on my face is because I think the landscape has really changed, which is creating a ton more opportunities. There's a lot more tactical approaches to what it means to work in housing, and it allows us to think a bit more strategically as well as Picken County. So what do I mean by changing landscape? Here's just a couple of the things that have happened over the last year and a half. At the state level, the state has put, last I counted, close to $600 million towards housing through a number of different grants and legislation and programs just in the last 2 years. We know that there's also federal grants that are allowed to go towards housing. The West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition, which was a budding idea 2 years ago, is now an official nonprofit, an official 501c3, who's hoping to hire their first staff member in a couple weeks here. They completed the roadmap, we completed the roadmap, and came out with a toolkit and a number of other resources that are being used across the state by communities. That is a huge maturity growth in the last 2 years for the coalition. Pickens County staff capacity, 2 years ago, you didn't have my position, the community resiliency manager, and you didn't necessarily have some of our other positions that are filled by GR Fielding or Jody Smith, where we actually have housing in some of the job descriptions. So we have some more staff capacity. And then last year, the board, the BOCC, did commit $5 million of general fund money for housing. So to me, these are really big landscape changes, and I think offer up a lot of new opportunities. There's also the changing policy landscape. So when the board met for your spring retreat this year in 2023, you recommitted to community housing through your policy statement around housing. And then just recently, the Pickens County Growth Advisory Committee came out with recommendations around housing and specifically said that the growth we do want as a community, I'm reading that quote there, that meets our community values is more affordable and middle housing.
Can you explain what middle housing is? Is there a word missing from that sentence? I keep looking at it.
Carrot can do that for you.
It's like Malcolm in the Middle or.
Something like, I don't understand.
I'm going to be brief, but there's an actual terminology within the housing landscape about middle housing and middle economy, which is the fact that the idea that outside of deed restricted, that you still have created a residential economy that is affordable and accessible through the free market. So within the growth committee, it was this concept of you have some availability of the middle housing, so free market housing is still attainable to people that live here, and that you don't just have a community that is only affordable housing or outside investors.
And I think it draws from the notion of like middle income.
Yeah.
As opposed to like upper income,
Yeah.
lower income.
Okay, that's a little murky for me still, but I'll work on that.
And Greg, I have a question too on problem identification. Is that more studies? Are we referring to more studies when we're doing more problem identification?
Sorry, I have to read. They're saying do not continue more studies.
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
going, I
Yes.
like the way you termed that.
Yes.
We're not going to do any more problem identification.
Yes, that was
Thank
the
you.
conversation that they had.
Okay,
I like your color.
sorry for that.
No, it's
I just-
okay.
I
mean,
was
I
stuck
think
on that
it's-
earlier when I read the packet. It's like, thank you for. I
Like
think
missing middle is sort of
The missing middle, right,
the
yeah. It seems like there could be another
terminology
word
here
there that
more
would
in
help.
those conversations.
Okay,
And I think, the Growth Advisory Committee recommendations on affordable housing are still newish to us, and so I think we're all still wrapping our heads around them. But I wanted to call it out as a pretty big shift in Pickens County's policy landscape, because it comes right on the heels of you all's recommitment to community housing at your retreat earlier this year, and then really hearing them call out specifically that this is where, growth is, I won't put words in their mouth, the growth we do want. So that's what we mean by shifting landscape. And I think it does create a lot of opportunities. So with these opportunities in mind, staff put together what we are calling I want to call it a working and draft housing plan, because it is so working and so draft that I don't want anyone to forget. We took the BOCC policy, the growth recommendations, we researched what's happening in other communities, and we looked at the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition toolkit. And we put together what was in your packet, which has some goals. The goals are merely a starting point for conversation. It also provides a huge array of tactics that we could undertake to address affordable housing. And it has options across the full housing continuum. So what do I mean by the housing continuum? You all have seen some version of this graphic a couple times, but I'll just walk it through again. So this talks about the full housing continuum being taking someone who is unhoused, providing immediate emergency shelter is a type of housing, providing transitional housing up to supportive housing. Supportive housing is more permanent, where you would live there and then receive services on site. Moving into community and social housing, going up to the subsidized market rent, which would be some of subsidized market rent, I guess, is fairly self-explanatory. Private market rent and home ownership. You can parse this out a couple different ways. Some people do it by income levels. You can call certain things differently, but the point being, the tactics that we put in front of you today don't just focus on free market rentals or deed restricted ownership. They really focus across the board on anything that could be considered housing, because we recognize that our community members need all of these different options. Whether you're middle, as Greg called out, depending on what that means, lower income, higher income. If you work in Pickens County, it's very unlikely that you can afford a home or a roof over your head in whatever fashion in Pickens County. So we need all of these. So when we go to the attachment and look at the plan, we did put in options to address all of these types of housing. So with that in mind, we also developed the plan with the 4 C's in mind. It starts with conservation. So these are programs that support our existing affordable housing. We get accolades and awards and shout outs from across the state for having one of the longest standing affordable housing programs in the state, if not across the country. And preserving those units, as we talk about here at this table, that are sometimes 40 years old, is a huge piece of affordable housing. So if we just focus on new and we lose all the existing, that's a huge loss. So the first C is conservation. Let's conserve what we have. The second is conversion. This has also been referred to as development neutral approaches. So this is taking existing free market and turning it into deed restricted or otherwise price restricted. You can take free market residential, or in this bucket is also commercial free market that you could turn into residential. So this just talks about, if it's out there and it's already built, can we convert it to be housing? And then the last 2 C's are combined together, construct and codes. So this is the more traditional strategy of buying land, building housing. We put codes in here because they work together. These don't really stand alone. If we don't have codes at Pickens County that enable the environment, then nobody can construct new affordable housing. And so when we think about the role of land use codes and a lot of the recommendations that come out of the Growth Committee, what it does is it supports the environment so that other people, developers, other entities, other organizations can come in and build new housing and contribute to solving the problem. So it takes a bit of the burden off of Pickens County to be the developers. If we can have codes that enable the environment where building housing, affordable workforce housing, community housing is allowable in our code. So that's why we put the last 2 C's together. I'm going to jump into what's under these, but I just want you all to have a sense of the plan that's in front of you. Like I said, we put some preliminary goals in there. These are just a starter for a conversation. They're based on what when staff looks at kind of the environment that's out there, what's right now immediately kind of attainable or what we felt like was feasible, especially when you think about conversion. You can't convert unlimited single free market homes into affordable housing, right? There's some limit to what we could do there. When we think about building new housing, there's a limit on available land and available building and available partnerships that we can engage with. So we just put these out there. It's a rough scan of opportunities, and they're just a place to start.
Is there a time frame on this? When you put numbers on it, I kind of think, okay, you want to convert 25 units, 50 bedrooms by 2030, 2040, 2024? What are we talking?
Looking for some guidance from the board about what your appetite. Sorry. I think we'd be looking for guidance from the board about what your appetite for pace on these sorts of things are. This is putting a small dent in what the identified need has been. This was really tied back to some of the analysis that we had done around a potential ballot question and what we might be able to produce with a bonding question while leaving some ongoing on for conservation and conversion. And so through those mechanisms, if an opportunity presents itself, with financing, you can accelerate these things, but that takes both kind of political will and appetite. And so I think understanding this board's appetite for pace would be helpful. And whether these numbers are aggressive enough, not aggressive enough, those sorts of things. We're putting these out as an opportunity for this board to give us feedback.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's also resource dependent. So we put these together not necessarily feasible with our current resources, our staffing and our financial resources. So that goes into pacing as well as how quickly we want to resource these sorts of things.
Can I ask, I don't know if this is the time, but can I ask where partnerships come into this?
Yeah, I'm going to address partnerships
Excellent.
in just a bit. So, I don't know. I think we'll get to that maybe. Is that okay?
At your leisure?
Great. Thank you. So I wanted to just share the attachment so that, because I know you all have it, but this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our conversation today. And I want to get rid of this, and then you can probably see the whole thing. There we go. So that was how we created the plan, the working draft plan that was included in your packet. First, the color coding. Anything in green is something that we're actively as a county working in right now. Yellow is something that we're assessing, we're thinking about, we are considering. Red is a place where we're actively not working. So that's what the color coding is.
Actively not working.
Actively not working, passively not working. We're not working there.
We're not working on it.
For one reason or another. It's divided by the 4 C's that I talked about, so conservation, conversion, and construction and codes. And so I'll just kind of walk through why we chose to put things in here. So in conservation, the goal is to maintain our livable housing stock. So maintain what we have. Ideally, we don't lose a single unit. A single unit is a family that, or an individual that no longer has a place to live. So that's a big goal because we know that we are in danger of losing some units. So the place where we're most working here is mobile home preservation, which would be the county's purchase of the Phillips Mobile Home Park. Places we've kind of considered working or assessing is capital maintenance programs and helping individual HOAs improve capital reserves over time. So setting HOAs up to be more sustainable on their own. And then a place where we haven't chatted is about preserving expiring deed restrictions. Those were the 4 that felt like readily understood conservation techniques. You may have others that we can add to this. Conversion, we put out the goal of converting 25 units, maybe 50 bedrooms, of existing free market stock into deed restricted or somewhat other controlled. So maybe it's not a deed restriction, maybe it's employer controlled or something like that. Places where we work are our own employee deed restriction program. So internally, we offer a deed restriction program for our employees. We also, as a county, buy down individual units and then rent them back to either our employees or the community. We also, through our human services team, run housing credits and housing voucher programs. And then we provide rental subsidies and emergency assistance. Places where we're thinking about it but haven't quite gone there is non-congregate emergency shelter. We did a little bit of that during COVID, but we're no longer actively working there. And then permanent supportive housing is giving a bit of support to like response and things like that, but not quite like leading in that area or actively or really having a dent there. Some of the spaces where we're not working right now would be the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition. So the new Regional Housing Coalition would like to launch a deed restriction program that's community-wide. It is a place where we certainly can play, and we'll talk about that later on. Multifamily buy-downs, so this would be going out and, if it was ever available, buying an entire multifamily complex. So multiple units of a complex, kind of fixing it up and then renting it back to the community at an affordable rate. And then transitional housing, which I know that Lindsay's joining us today, so if we have questions about some of that, we can ask Lindsay about what that would look like. So that's the conversion space. Oh, thank you. Let's bring her in. And then the construction codes, as I mentioned, we put them together because they relate to each other. So our role as the county is to write and enforce codes. But we do that not just for the sake of doing it, but to create the environment where a private affordable housing developer or a different organization or a nonprofit developer could come in and help us solve or meet our community need through building more housing. So if we don't have the codes in place, nobody's going to want to come in and help us with that problem, which means it leaves it totally to us. So I like the thought of we can do more codes work, and it actually helps us help them help us a little bit. Also, the county has a role in construction. When we think about where we've worked or where we're continuing to work, I think about the 2022 board retreat where you all gave us some direction on housing that was mainly around partnerships, to your point, Greg. The Forest Service partnerships, we talked a little bit about the Public Works Master Plan and some other kind of, you gave us some direction about where you would like to see new housing considered. So, that's what we're considering when we think about the county's role in new construction. The difference here is conservation and conversion are fairly quick turnarounds and could be a good focus for the next couple of years. They could be a good use of the $5 million. When we get into construction, as I'm realizing, these partnerships are long term. These projects are massive and multi-years. And so when we're thinking about later on today how we want to spend our $5 million and if we want to spend that fairly quickly, unfortunately, a lot of these construction type projects are not going to be eligible for that because they just are, the sheer building of a partnership is taking a year or more. So that's, just some thoughts there. So what falls in construction codes? We put out the goal of creating 150 new housing units. Things we're currently doing would be the horizontal infrastructure subsidy. That's like the role that the county played at Basalt Vista, where we kind of funded the horizontal infrastructure and then other partners funded the vertical infrastructure. And specialized transitional housing, so that's the contribution we just gave to Response for their new shelter. Places we're considering working would be land banking, so purchasing land and saving it for future build, permanent supportive housing, and then non-congregate emergency shelter. So both of those live in both conversion and construction. And then areas where we're not working would be transitional housing, anything around encouraging ADUs or CDUs being built so that we can house more folks. Purchasing master leases, so that would be an example is that CDOT project that we had talked about a while back, where if someone like CDOT or somebody else builds housing and then they lease us back a number of units and then we can use those for our employees or for the community. And then the vertical infrastructure, that's the actual building of the houses or building of the units. This is what we came up with as a way to really highlight that when average Joe out on the street thinks about housing, they think you buy land and you build new housing. And I think as we all dive into this a lot deeper, there's such a wide array of tactics that we can take to address housing, and what it means to quote unquote work in housing is vast. And where I'm seeing a ton of success in other communities is in the conversion world. Construction is limited. New land to build up is limited. Where we're going to have the most impact in this community is certainly going to be conservation. I think that there's a lot of places in conversion where we can start to play. And then, we can consider what our role is in codes. Construction still lays out there as one of the the ways to get a lot more, but these are certainly other tactics that we can use. I have 2 more slides, and then I want to be quiet, but I want to take questions or, yeah.
EDU or CDU ADUs, is there not an issue about enforcement we could do now? Because I think there's some uses out there that are kind of slipping through our fingers that people have an obligation, and we need to, maybe that's something we can do quicker, sooner than later.
I'll make this a very quick response. So my understanding is there's not much enforcement that can be done now because of the Telluride decision and rent control. So the conversation within the growth committee was kind of revising what we've done in the past, and that to do a ADU, or excuse me, to do a CDU in the county, that we would then require future ones to have a deed restriction that is turned over to APSHA or the county. So that's the next generation built on the lessons we learned from the first time around.
So if we were to enforce now, the Telluride decision could come back and bite us. That's a risk that we would take.
We cannot force occupancy, and that is the issue that we have had.
But for those that we can, I know APSHA has hired an additional compliance
Right.
person, and they're focusing on that.
So there, yeah, and I knew there were some hanging out there that we might be able to get a handle on it.
Well, and I think Phyllis called a bunch of them a few years ago and was like, "Hey, would you house the deputy? Hey, would you house?" and did not get good
Got nowhere.
response.
Okay, I think that's something that's kind of like conversions. We've got those units sitting out there that
Yeah.
aren't being utilized by the rule. So maybe that's just something we can talk about in the future. Thank you.
But that could be like a buy down, I mean,
Yeah.
they've already gotten the permission, but it could be like a buy down
Yeah.
for that deed restriction or something. I don't know.
This may be a simple question that has probably been answered and explored ad nauseum. But now that we've got this, and I love this, thank you. This really helps. This is great work. I'm wondering how many people in the community, people who are, one, looking to find housing for themselves so they can do their job here in the community, and also for employers and organizations who are vexed with trying to house their employees. I talked to somebody at lunchtime today who said, we have to hire a new manager, and where they live is really going to be the biggest criteria for who we hire, how they can live here. And that's what we're seeing across the board. So what I'm wondering is, are the businesses and the various entities who are all looking for housing participating with you? Have you reached out to them? Do we know what they think they need, and what would their willingness be to participate as partners in doing this? Because looking at some of the comments we've had on recent surveys, some people say, well, why is the county even building housing? And then other people are saying, hey, get to it. Clearly we have a problem. What I'm wondering is, do we have a clear idea of how the community is stepping up? Because everybody says we need it, but who's going to step up and say, I really want to participate here? I can think of a few who would like to partner with us, but I'm wondering, do we have a rapport with them? Has that rapport been cultivated? Because I think they're going to be essential for any one of these C's here. There's a collaboration. It'd be the 5th C.
Yeah. I would say that the obvious partnerships is something we are actively cultivating. So with our municipalities, with our large employers. I have also noticed a theme that is concerning from a resiliency standpoint, which is that every employer, if they have any resources, is running their own housing program essentially.
Right.
So if you have any way, shape, or form as an employer, you're probably going out and buying a unit for your business or multiple units. The reason I say it's concerning is we can all imagine a time 10 years from now where or lots of employers across the community all have housing associated with them. And then we're attracting all these we're attracting people to come and work here, and then there's no mobility. Your housing is tied to your employer, and if housing remains in the crisis that it's in now, that means that nobody has mobility in employment, and nobody has mobility to grow a family or to downsize, because what you got
They're stuck with
was
what
where
they've
you
got.
are. So I do think that that's a massive opportunity for the county to lead. Because if there is a larger pool of community housing that employers can rely on to hire their new manager, for example, that means we're setting ourselves up for a longer-term sustainable, resilient approach, in my opinion. But I think right now, we're not in a position as staff to go out to some of these smaller employers and invite partnership, because we're just now really looking for direction from the board on which of these items you have most interest. If we'd like to lead as the county, and then I think it's fully appropriate to go out and say, do you want to partner? But John, you're leading those partnership conversations. So.
Yeah, Greg, and so some of that has actually been driven by where the opportunities are. Are there, properties that we could partner on, and then threading together, entities with need, or entities with resources that they want to put towards affordable housing. We have not necessarily convened a broader discussion, inviting folks to the table, partly because without either property or a specific project to buy down, versus the one-off units, which is what we've been doing, we don't have much to put on the table as a reason to really come and talk to us. And so that becomes a challenge. We do have out there that we've appropriated some funds, and so partners sometimes do seek us out, and we can initiate those partnership discussions now. Where most of our energy has been going right now are cultivating the partnerships that Ashley mentioned earlier. We've been working closely with Eagle County, Town of Basalt, and the Forest Service, walking that property, that 23 acres, I think, 28 acres, up on the bench, by Crown Mountain Park. That presents a significant opportunity if we're able to bring that to fruition. We've been buying one-off units, but I think the type of convening that you're talking about has not necessarily happened in the community. APSHA would be our closest, I think, proxy to that.
Right.
I guess I would comment too. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I wonder if Patty has anything to report out from ACRA conversations. But like how do you pool resources in a way that it's like meaningful for the smallest contributor? So like if someone can buy their own housing, they're probably already doing that. But for those who can't
Say like
meaningfully,
sachets.
who just can't meaningfully buy individual units, but would pool money, how do they get some assurance of return from that? I don't know. Like that's just been one of the
I think that
sticky
discussion's
wickets
been going on.
Have been thinking through.
And more on a bigger basis, the Northwest Cog Economic Development District, working with Northwest Cog and CAST, is making a huge effort that's coming out on information. It's not a study, it's a report as to what all these different communities across our region and throughout CAST are doing and what their issues are. So that'll be a way to look at solutions elsewhere and some great ideas. It's small business, big business, because it's actually being really sponsored through DOLA and the Economic Development District. So, and ACRA's going to be involved in that too,
And
as is Ashley.
I do think the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition, we've had those conversations multiple times. That's what the coalition really sees itself as, is potentially building out a buy-in system, like you're mentioning, Kelly, where small employers can get benefit out of it. And that's really the intention behind this community deed restriction program would be, it's not determined by you only work for certain employers or you only work in a certain area. It's really region-wide. So I think that's why, as you'll see here in a second, it's on our recommendations for a potential near-term step, would be if we support that, we're supporting access for these other businesses. West Mountain is going to require that businesses have some skin in the game, right, as well. So I think
Big or small.
Yes, big or
Big
small.
and or small.
Yeah. I have 2 more slides, and then just some questions for y'all. So the funding that kind of complements this draft plan, we've mentioned all year that we have this $5 million that the board reserved from the general fund. We did use a portion of that to recently purchase an employee unit. So we have 4.4 million remaining of that. Those are dedicated funds that the board set aside for specifically housing from the general fund. You've also heard from me a number of times on the ARPA funds or the Local Assistance and Tribal Consistency Fund, LACTFA, let's go with that. Combined together, we started with about 4.2 million. We've used that to support our 2 childcare programs, the stipend program as well as the maintenance program. We recently gave some money to Response. We pulled that out of here, and the overnight shelter for public health. So we have around 2 million worth of that money remaining. There's some asterisks there because ARPA money especially is really limited in use. It has to be used within the ARPA guidelines, which means we have to identify a very specific COVID impact as the federal government defines it, and then use it in a very short timeline along those guidelines. The consistency funds have fewer guidelines, but are way less money remaining. So one of the questions I have for you all today is, in searching over the last year, which is one of the things you all have tasked me with, I have found very limited uses of the ARPA money on housing. I've found way more opportunities to use it on childcare, which is why I brought those opportunities forward. There's still a number of readily available childcare needs out there that the ARPA money could go towards, and I'm not finding as feasible or as readily available housing opportunities. So we can kind of talk about if we want to continue to reserve 50% of this ARPA money for housing, or if we want to consider freeing it up for other uses such as childcare that are going to align better with the ARPA guidelines. If we want to use the ARPA money on housing, I would say it's best used on kind of the left side of that continuum. So the transitional housing, emergency shelter, supportive housing. It's going to be hard to put this small amount of money with the guidelines and the short timeline towards some larger community housing projects. And we've been searching, and it's really hard to find an appropriate use of that. So that's one of my questions for you today, but this is the funding that is available to support the plan we put in front of you all. And then lastly, we looked at, okay, what are our near-term options? If the board says, if you say, all right, we want to do something in the next year, we want to use some of this money in the next year, what's available? So I mentioned, I think the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition's deed restriction program, which was outlined in your packet as an attachment, is a pretty plug-and-play way that we could use some money and have an impact on the community. We could also look at some conversion transitional housing. I know that there's a lot going on further down Valley to try and get some new transitional housing in place. We can look at providing the horizontal subsidy like we did on Basalt Vista for new upcoming construction projects that we know like our municipal partners are looking at. And we can look at potentially some more community rental assistant programs that could look like giving money to West Mountain, who wants to run like a first last rental assistance program, because if you're a family looking to get into a new rental, first and last could easily be upwards of $8,000, which a lot of folks don't have. Or it could be monthly rental assistance programs, since we know people who are in what we call kind of naturally occurring affordable housing. So it's not deed restricted, but it's still somewhat affordable. Those prices are going up all the time. So is there a way that we can assist with that? So we could either do that just internally to the county, it's our own program, or we could partner to do that. These are the ones that came to mind for staff that we could pretty quickly evaluate for implementation in the next year. We're, of course, welcome to other thoughts on things you want to put on either the near-term or the long-term options, and then we can bring that back for follow-up. Today's discussion, 4 questions for you, which I know is more than usual. As far as the use of existing funding, so the $5 million, we put up some ideas for near-term spending of the $5 million. What do you think of those? What are we missing? Are they the right ones? Would you like more information on any of those? The previous board direction we received on ARPA was to split it 50-50 between childcare and housing. We're over the 50%, just over on childcare. So if we're going to spend more on childcare, that needs to be board direction, that we're no longer keeping that 50-50. And if you want to keep the 50-50 on housing, I can't promise you we'll come back with options, but we will continue to explore them. And I just worry about coming up against that timeline. That money has to be fully dedicated by the end of 2024. And then kind of a random one-off, but we said this was all things housing. APSHA has their maintenance program. What is the term for it? I'm forgetting right now.
Not capital.
Deferred maintenance.
Something like that. Yeah.
I apologize. I should have had that.
The city
It's
agreed
not
that-
capital reserves because it's
Right.
like individual unit
We,
repairs,
we,
not.
we bumped it from
HRQ
100 to
repairs.
200 if they would match, is that,
If they would match, yeah.
have
So
they agreed to?
yeah, so APSHA staff came to you in May and presented and asked for a $100,000 contribution for the county. You all said we think it should be $200,000 if the city would match that. Liz from APSHA went back to the city. The city said they would contribute $200,000. So I guess the ante has been upped. And the question
So
back
you
to
need
you
a
all,
thumbs up on that, is that?
I want to know where it's coming from.
the money. Probably from the 5 million.
I think so, that's what I
Yeah.
understood,
Yeah, that was where we had initially
Is that
talked
right?
about it.
yeah. So
John, that 200,000 for APSHA would come from the 5 million, yeah. And then,
So do we need do you want to go, let's talk about that. Is that something this board would approve of if it was brought back to us
We've already allocated the money to housing, so I don't know if
For
we.
APSHA?
for the APSHA, $200,000?
I thought we already approved that.
Well, we offered to bump it to 200,000 and the city said, agreed. Now, if we've approved that already, you don't need to ask us. But if we need to give you a thumbs up.
Then we approved it coming
to
from
go
the 5
forward.
million.
you approved it contingent on the city
Right,
upping
okay.
it. And
So
so
we're-
I
And so they
didn't
have.
want to go ahead with it unless.
So this is just a
without.
report that they.
It's confirming, yeah. So the original ask was for $100,000. This board upped it to $200,000 contingent on the city matching that. The city matched that, and so we're just confirming that, yep, we're going to do the
So
200,000.
that's already done. That's not a question.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
thank
guess
you.
it could be an exclamation mark.
Regarding the
We're going to
ARPA,
do that.
regarding the ARPA split, what was you had 3 different categories in housing that would qualify, and those were
That would be,
on the lower left end, lower income end of the spectrum. What's the highest category there that ARPA funds could still be used?
there's not a hard and fast rule around that. It's a combination of the ARPA guidelines and what we know is available in the community. And so, for example, the contribution to response was a perfect use of, well, we actually use the LACTA funds, but it's a great use of that. It qualifies because we can show a direct COVID impact. It's not necessarily the ARPA guidelines that hold us up with going further up in the housing continuum. It's the sheer amount of money that's needed. For us, if you wanted to purchase a free market unit, we're looking at, over $1 million.
Could we apply some of those funds toward helping with the horizontal infrastructure, for instance, on a project? Say somebody came to us and said, hey, we could use your help, preparing to do our,
Well, I can give you a real life example.
I could too, but I can't talk about it yet.
We cannot use ARPA on any sort of planning efforts. So if we actually wanted to use it on putting pipes in the ground, that is a possibility, but a stretch for the guidelines, because we'd have to draw it back to an identified category of people who are impacted by COVID, and then the identified impact. And then we'd have to show that the pipe going in the ground is providing housing for that identified kind of group of people.
And be spent by 26, which is hard.
I feel like Eagle County has had success with us. They took 10 million and did a variety of are in the process of a variety of programs that you've listed some of, so I feel like we don't have to totally reinvent the wheel on some things, but
Yeah.
that's where I would focus pursuit, whether that is, you know, a deed buy down or rental assistance, or transitional housing and whatever other ideas Lindsay's come to the table with, is what I would focus. I feel like we should be able to spend $2 million on housing from the ARPA funds.
Can we put out an RFP to partners we don't know exist yet in the community? Is there any point to that? If we turned over every stone, could we say, put out an actual RFP and say, hey, we've got this money to spend on housing and with this criteria. If it meets these guidelines, please come to us. I'm just wondering if we may get somebody coming out of the woodwork who says, hey, listen, that $2 million or part of it could actually help us make sense out of what we're trying to do here. I'd love to see something like that happen, just because I'm hopeful that it's not just us who are trying to solve this problem.
Right.
And maybe we can sweeten the pot for somebody who's trying to figure it out for themselves or for their business or for their,
We still have to beat the ARPA guidelines.
we'd have to meet their guidelines, but
Yeah.
it sounds like maybe there's some wiggle room. I'm not sure I understand it fully,
Yeah.
but you've kind of you've left the door open.
It's certainly an exercise that staff could do to try and write that RFP and see if there's any way to have it be open-ended enough that people could apply and have it meet the ARPA guidelines. I think it will be challenging.
Right. It's probably not an individual who's trying to figure out their own housing, but it might be a developer who's trying to get the numbers right and could see a way to make this work with us.
But it still has to like serve the need of somebody impacted by COVID.
Correct.
I don't
That's
know
the criteria. That's the
specifics
basic
of Eagles,
criteria.
But if Eagle, turns out after Eagle does it, somebody can come back from the feds and say, pay the money back because you didn't follow the guidelines. I mean, you
I
just
don't
have
think
to be
that's happening.
careful. Yeah, because I don't know how Eagle technically used it, but.
So that's, yeah, so I'd love to see it spent on housing, because it just seems like I think we're making some pretty good strides with the childcare. No doubt there's more need for childcare. But it'd be a shame to say, well, we're going to redirect housing funds to childcare. That doesn't feel good when I swallow it.
Right. There is one childcare request that would love to come in front of you at the end of the summer, which would be from Town of Basalt on behalf of the Stotts Mill Child Care Center. Town of Basalt would like some help, some financial help building out that new center, which would end in close to 25 new childcare spots in the Mid-Valley in Picken County. So,
Can they
With
put
no-
housing on the top floor for their staff?
Yeah, with nobody to run the child care center, but we're gonna have space.
they have a provider that's on board and is staffed up to do it. So it's, they would love the opportunity to come in front of you and at least ask. And we can continue to explore housing options. John, I'm looking at you. I think we're trying hard to find them. And I think, Greg, we can go through the exercise of trying to see if we could create an RFP that would align with the ARPA guidelines and report back on
I don't
the
want to
feasibility
create
of
work
it.
for you unless there's a real opportunity to put that money to work.
Greg, yeah, and Greg, I think the hesitation that you're feeling from staff right now is one of scale. That in the current construction environment, it's unbelievable to be saying this, right? But $2 million
chump
just
change.
doesn't go that far to make a significant impact, even when we're talking about partnership on horizontal infrastructure. So I think our hesitancy is, you can put it out there, but when we tie all these strings to it, and we're talking $2 million, we're not sure that that's going to be the best use of those funds. We could probably, though, look at some of the transitional, maybe there's an opportunity with Lindsay on, permanent supportive housing that maybe we can even just get a unit or two that starts to put a dent in that, which would be a huge improvement in that area. Lindsay, I'm hoping you're going to jump in here as I'm talking about this, but those may be better opportunities than an RFP just because of the scale. If it were $20 million, we'd probably be in a different ballpark.
Right, okay, I
So-
see Lindsay has her hand up, as does Steve. Lindsay, do you want to answer that specific comment, and then we'll go to Steve?
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. Thanks, everybody. Lindsay May, Director of Human Services. I also help run the Picking County Housing Stability Coalition and sit on some regional efforts as well. And what I'm hearing, and something that I want to inspire in the dialogue here, is around services and programs. You've already identified, like, helping with the community navigators, right? That's going to be providing a service, and that's really to attend to the folks in our community that are unhoused. There's a whole nother, when we talk about transitional housing, there's a whole nother subsector of people that we're talking about who, because of COVID, are quickly, either they're being evicted because they're making too much money, right? So they no longer qualify for their housing needs. They have to move out quickly because of the loss of a job, because maybe they're downsizing, different businesses may be doing that. And so what happens is somebody will lose their housing very quickly. And the intention of transitional housing, just like with the money that you all gave towards the capital campaign for response for the shelter, is when someone loses their housing quickly, there's a place for them to go. And what that means is that, John, you started talking about like units. I actually don't think we will have a big problem finding partnerships around units. Like, I think our partnership with APSHA, with Lightech Properties, with Snowmass Village, with some of the stuff that they're doing, I think there's big opportunity, but the services and programs don't actually exist right now to support people getting into those places. So the community navigation, housing navigation, what it takes to actually quickly move out of one place into another place, become self-sustainable or self-sufficient, and then find a free market or another affordable housing opportunity. That's what we talk about when we say transitional housing. So there really could be some opportunity around the actual services that we provide to people around how to navigate this housing crisis right now that a lot of people are in. So I don't know if that inspires any ideas, but $2 million, John, to your point, is not a ton of money. But when you talk about programs and services, it actually is. So it could bolster up quite a bit of support for folks in our community who are needing it, who aren't homeless right now, because that's where we've put a lot of our energy, but folks who are right on the cusp, one paycheck away, or get an eviction notice and have nowhere to go.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm going to go to Steve.
So I'm wondering if there's any way we could spend our housing split from the ARPA money on the West Mountain Housing Regional Housing Authority coalition. That would be a way we could leverage the smaller amount of money we would have from that and pool it with money from other, the other entities down valley. Maybe use it for land banking or doing some projects, or there seem to be more opportunities for buy downs of maybe whole housing units there that would be appropriate for perhaps transitional housing or emergency housing or that sort of thing. So that's just a thought on how to use ARPA money for housing. Also, I think on the chart for the land banking is on the more long-range construction and codes, but the land banking would be taking advantage of opportunities when there is a parcel of land that would be suitable for a housing project, to put money, jump on that immediately, because those kind of parcels are probably becoming fewer and fewer, or maybe they're farther and farther away in Newcastle or Silt or Parachute or somewhere. If there's anything closer, we should be putting money into that as the opportunity arises. So I would have that be a high priority for the next couple of years, along with the conservation and conversion. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
I'm hearing an interest in staff at least bringing back options for how we could spend the ARPA money on housing. And yeah, I think that we can do that, and we can bring back options, and we can see what comes up. And in the meantime, I think, we have quite a bit of that money still left to spend, around 1.6 of ARPA, in a pretty short timeline. I think if opportunities come up that align, I don't want to not bring them to you either. So if you're okay with it, I do know that Town of Basalt would like to come to you at the end of the summer with an ask around childcare. And I think you can consider it. And ideally, we can time some of our brainstorming around how we might use ARPA money on housing around that same time. So you at least have a sense for your options. And we can think
Right.
creatively. These have been good ideas here today.
I was going to ask for exactly what you just offered.
Okay.
That, if it comes back to us from Basalt and that we reach out to see, one more time, there might be something lurking out there. Perhaps that's gives us some more concrete options to look at.
Yeah, at least you have things to compare.
Kelly?
Yeah, I would be interested in sort of revisiting the 4.4 million after we have a joint meeting with the city. I think that there are some very obvious kind of initiatives we could partner on with them that will require funding, that I'd like us to keep in mind. I also just want to point out, if folks didn't read the article today, that the city has decided to only allow workers in the UGB to apply for the new Burlingame units. And so anyone who works outside of the UGB or in Basalt or elsewhere in Pickens County would not qualify. The genesis of those conversations go back to sort of their challenge to us to raise money on housing, and show up as better funding partners on the housing solutions. I'm disappointed that they've followed through on that. I think it's a disservice to the community, but I just want to keep that in mind.
Well, yeah, you hate for that then to push us to say any of our housing that we build in the future is only going to be for people who don't work in the city. I mean, we're all in this together. So, yeah, change in direction on that one, but.
Well, and there's a whole, I'm just like, this just complicates how APSHA manages the whole system. There's a whole host of reasons why I find that to be a very disappointing decision that I will articulate to our colleagues at the city. But anyway, I thought we should keep that in mind.
I wanted to ask you, Ashley, I don't know if you've had more conversation with CDOT. I was just thinking back to our CDOT conversation of last fall regarding their plan to put housing it's in Pickens County, but it's somewhere down near Eagle County and Emma area.
Yeah.
What happened there? Has anything happened? Did they put some mobile homes in there or modulars, or is there still an opportunity for us to help them?
Yeah, it's actually in Eagle County. It's not in Pickens County.
It's not in
Really?
Pickens.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
over by Hooksboro Bridge there.
Okay, somewhere near the border.
Yeah. That falls into a category of lots of kind of wait and see partnerships that we continue to foster. CDOT does have plans to build. They're debating between stick-built and modular. And they have said if their needs plus their commitments to their other partners are met, then they will offer up to the local governments in the area to do a master lease on that. There's probably a couple other partnerships that are starting around that sort of model. And then, the conversations with the Forest Service continue around some of those. So that goes in definitely the partnership building category where we just continue to stay in touch. And those are
Right.
longer term, much longer term.
Sure.
To Steve's point around land banking, like certainly if there's land that comes up around Pickens County that could be good for affordable housing development, we're trying to stay, we'd like to be aware of that. And I think the regional coalition is about to release some land inventory information that will help us follow that a bit more. Those are just kind of, if they come up, and we'll need to act quickly. But in the meantime, just really building those partnerships. Kelly had mentioned that she'd like to hold off on talking about the use of the 4.4 million, formerly the 5 million, on near-term options until after the joint meeting with the city of Aspen next week. Would you all like that as well? We just tossed up some near-term options. I wasn't sure if any of them sparked your interest and you're definitely interested in some more info, or if you'd all like to wait until after the city meeting next week.
Yeah, I'd like to wait because I don't want to spend the money now and need the money later.
And I feel like many of these, maybe not the new construction, could be the ARPA, drawing the ARPA funds. So that's what, I don't think you need to hold off on any opportunities that fall in those other 3 buckets.
Okay. I don't think the deed restriction program with the coalition will qualify for ARPA funding.
Can you check that with Eagle County? Because I don't understand how they're getting through it with their Indeed program.
Yeah, that's general fund money,
Okay.
is their Indeed program. They're using ARPA money for primarily childcare.
Okay.
Yeah. Those were the questions, except for we put together a working draft of a housing plan.
We are way over.
Any initial feedback, thoughts?
I think it's a good place to start. I think it just kind of is bringing back some of the stuff we talked about before. And we've asked for a plan, and I think we've got, like I said, a good place to start. And I thank you.
So I think what we're feeling is we're running out of time and the board would like us to bring this back. Okay.
Well, we're going to have a huge discussion next Monday. I think it's
Yeah.
going to change a lot of our thinking, but at least we've got this in our minds now to move forward with that discussion with the city.
I mean, I would like to check
On
a little
Tuesday.
understanding on the board, because I sort of was a bit of the impression that there was some interest in moving us closer to a plan that had more detail in it, similar to what the city of Aspen and town of Snowmass Village have put together. This to me is like the big overarching, and I guess I want to understand if there's continues to be interest to detail this out further. Like, what would those code changes be? What would those projects be that we would partner on? What would, some more of that look like? 'Cause I was of the impression that we wanted.
I
the
don't
board
disagree
wanting
with
more
that. I
detail.
think that's kind of the direction we were going in. But again, I think we're gonna hear a lot next Tuesday.
Yeah.
And and you're gonna be there.
Yes.
So I think that'll maybe help us give some more direction on what we want to see in a plan, because the one the city did, I think, was really good. And I think we're going to see a lot out of the plan, the update that comes out of Northwest COG and CAST. That gives us more of a regional perspective of what's going on again at current date. So, and that's due out the end of the summer. So, but yeah. And we really do need to take a break.
Yep, we're
Because
gonna
we have
stop.
people waiting.
We're gonna stop now.
One last thought from me on the Picken County Community Housing Plan. I would also look at the Eagle County Housing program that they have recently instigated, and it seems like they have some really good ideas there too. So if we put their best ideas to City of Aspen, Town of Snowmass Village, put all those best ideas together and have that be an element of our community housing plan, that would be good.
Great.
And while we're at it, I like this, and I'm approving it, certainly. I just want to make sure we're reaching out, and everybody who's expressed an interest in working with us one way or another knows about it and might be given opportunity to input on it as well, if they haven't already.
Okay.
So that's it for me. I think we're good. We're going to move on.
All right. Thank you all.
Those are your questions answered.
I think so. We're going to give $200,000 to App Show. We're going to bring you back options for spending ARPA money on housing. We're going to wait until after next week's joint meeting with City Council to think about how we spend $5 million.
4.5.
4.4. And then we will also bring back another working draft and get some more specific feedback when we can just focus on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for the time today.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Can we take a few?
We're going to take
Sorry, guys,
we're
but
going
we
to
haven't
take
had a break.
sorry folks, we're going to take an 8-minute break here.
8 minutes?
We're going to come back. We're taking a 10-minute break. Sorry, pushing you guys back 15 minutes. Thank you. Okay, hello, everybody. We're back from a break. This is the work session on Tuesday, July 11th. And up next is a conversation with our coroner, Dr. Steve Ayers, Deputy Coroner Audra Keith. Ann Driggers, I think, is online. Connie Baker, our budget director, is here. And take it away, whoever's beginning.
Well,
And also our sheriff is here too, also want to say thank you.
And the past deputy coroner. Actually,
Oh, okay, there you go.
He's still on the roster, technically.
All right, good. Let's just put him on, give him another shift. Okay.
Give him something to do.
So, since we had the wrong AIS in your packet materials, I've passed out the current one. Steve, I did email it out. Hopefully you were able to see that. I have it up on the screen. So since you did not have the opportunity to read this, I'm going to give just a quick overview of what's in the AIS, and then at that point I'll hand it off to Steve and Audra to fill in some gaps and then see what questions the board has. So we're here today asking for the conversion of an on-call part-time position in the coroner's office into a full-time ongoing position. The reason for this has to do with the data in the number of deaths that are investigated by the coroner's office. There is a graph included in your packet material that shows quite a large increase from 2020 through what we're forecasting for 2023. Currently, through June, the number is at 40. This increase ever since 2020 mirrors some of the other service demand increases that we've seen in our community. It's really a trend that we're seeing across the board for county services, and unfortunately the coroner's office has been following that same trend. About 2.5 years ago, in response to the growing caseload within the coroner's office, we did come to the board and ask for the first full-time position for the coroners. Up to that point, this function had been fulfilled just by using on-call employees. On-call employees who have other jobs or part-time jobs and would just fill in here or there as they could. And for a while that worked. With the addition of Audra, certainly it's made a huge difference for the department. But as you've seen in this graph, the number of deaths to investigate just keeps growing. What's happened now is that for a number of reasons, the model of using on-call deputies is just not working. A few weeks ago, the airport came to you and talked about their model of using seasonals for the airport and how that's no longer working and the need to have regular positions. So this is a trend that we're seeing in a number of different areas. Due to many factors within our community, people are just not able to serve in that on-call capacity. What ends up happening is that those who are there, and namely our one full-time employee, spends about 3 weeks out of the month being on call 24 hours, 7 days a week. And that's not sustainable. So this is a model that's failing and a situation that's unsustainable. And that brings us, of course, they'll fill in a little more details, but that brings us to our request to have one of the on-call positions converted into a regular ongoing position. Fortunately, you had the discussion on housing, but we do have someone in the Valley who currently has housing and who is trained and experienced and could fill this position right away. We are asking for an immediate hire, should the board so decide, and we can come back with third quarter supplemental requests to adjust the budget and fill in where necessary. So that's the big picture of the request, and I'll pass it off to Steve and Audra to fill in where I was lacking in going through this.
Okay, thanks. And thanks for the past support, John and the commissioners, and Audra, our chief deputy coroner, has revolutionized the coroner's office in many ways, and we'll show you a little bit of that coming up. So yeah, we were up to 40 cases when this report was prepared. 10 days ago. We're at 43 cases now. And one growing number is hospice cases. So as an example, this year, the number of hospice cases so far up to the first part of July has already exceeded the entire number of hospice cases for last year. Now, normally we don't have to do an investigation on a hospice case. It's technically a natural attended death, but we do enough of an investigation to make sure that everything is okay. And we have caught 2 hospice cases and 1 hospital case this year that were going to be signed off by the private doctor that were technically coroner cases, which demands a full investigation, cooperation with law enforcement, scene investigation, all that sort of thing. So, which is the reason we do it. And the growth is, just keeps exceeding our ability to cover it with on-call people. I think when we approached you and asked to hire Audra or somebody as our chief deputy coroner, and she was the eminently qualified person who was readily available, I had mentioned that we had just trained a physician assistant at the hospital as a deputy coroner, got her, spent a year with training and certification and all the stuff, and she quit before she ever took a call. Just didn't work out with her lifespan. Since then, Rob Glassmeyer, the Garfield coroner, has become sworn in as a Pitkin deputy so that he can help us 2 or 3 times a year and it not fall on, he could do it as mutual aid from Garfield, but he didn't want that to fall on their, shoulders. So he said, I'll get sworn in as a Pitkin deputy. He takes call occasionally. And then we have added, one of our main deputy coroners, Kevin Hadfield, pursued his nursing career, is no longer available. And we've sworn in, 2 more since?
3.
3. And 2, one now can only, because of his obligations with his new job with the city, can only take call 2 days a month. And the other one had to resign starting as of this coming August because she also transitioned to a full-time job with benefits. And so these are people who we emphasized when we worked with them and hired them that longevity is a must, and yet 2 years in, they're not able to help us anymore. So that, as Connie mentioned, and I put in this is my own little notes, but simply put, the part-time deputy model is failing at a faster rate than we had predicted. We came to you when we asked for the first full-time employee saying that model was failing, but we thought it would a hybrid. And we're still looking at a hybrid, but the hybrid needs to be more top-heavy on full-time people, less heavy on the part-timers. And unfortunately, we've had gaps in coverage where we had either no one to cover or we were doing different versions of coverage, like part by telephone, part by Garfield County Mutual Aid, a few things like that. I think I told you a couple of years ago, like my goal is to not take call, to be the administrator, to make sure everything gets done, all the projects over the years that I wanted to see through and didn't have time for, and not be the person out there doing the call. And but nevertheless, I've still been doing it more often than I want, which is any. And that leaves me free to help the others. Like if there's a complicated scene, I can go help and pitch in and be contributing without having to take the case and take out the next 3 or 4 days to take that case. So the position would also. Would help us with, we have a ton of projects, and when Audra came on board, she helped us get organized. We have, detailed procedures and policy management. We have details on so many different things, forms, continuity, and consistency to comply with tons of different types of government regulations, and working with police and so forth. But we have a shopping list of projects that are worthy and great. For example, one is a brochure for the family. Like when you die, what happens? What's the coroner do? What happens? When do I get my loved one's body? And Audra put one of those together for us. She's got a system in place now for sending follow-up sympathy cards. We have a pages long list of projects we cannot get done. And some are to do with day-to-day operational things like stocking equipment and keeping up with lists and all that. And this person would not only take the call burden, but help us catch up on those projects. One, for example, is we have an unidentified body we need to exhume and do some DNA testing on, and we're all set to do it. Everybody's in place. We don't have the time to do it. We cannot take the on-call person out of circulation long enough to get this project accomplished. So it's been put off for some time. And then I'll speak just a little bit to Matt, the person we're looking at. Now, obviously, this would go up for anybody to apply for, but the having the combination of the person who's trained, experienced in the valley, has advanced degrees in anthropology and anatomy, experience doing hundreds, if not 1,000 autopsies as an autopsy assistant with the New Mexico ME's office, and lives here and has a house here and a family. To find the qualified person would be a huge challenge. It's just not your everyday kind of qualification that somebody has. And to find somebody to move to this valley, that's, the challenge there. So it's a double bonus for us. And that's why we're asking for this to take place now, so we can get the call list done. We cannot experience the burnout that some of us are experiencing by, doing more than we should be doing, and to capture this opportunity to have the right person in the right place and time. So, and I wanted to, Audra, I wanted you to add if there's anything else you wanted to add, and some of the statistics, numbers, or.
Most of my statistics I included in those annual reports, which I think you guys got those.
You.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did you have any questions about those reports?
There was one error on one page. It shows accident deaths, and then the last column shows a really high column. It accidentally printed out all the deaths in one column, so it's a bar graph. Just ignore the last bar.
Got it. Oh, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm wondering, do you see a connection between the community demographics and the trends that you're seeing over time? Like,
Yeah.
how do we think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I see this from the emergency department point of view as well, on the types of patients we have, which is, that's very similar to what the coroner's office does. The coroner's office sees that percentage of the same population that does not survive, and then some who never make it to the hospital. But what we see are tons of people who came here for whatever reason during COVID, who may not live here, don't have their residence here, but they're spending their time here. Their kids go to school here. They don't have doctors here to take care of them. They die. That becomes a coroner's case because they don't have a local physician, even if they had a terminal illness. So it's just busier all around. It's not more fentanyl. It's not more suicide. It's not more car wrecks. It's just more of everything.
And the senior demographics.
Yeah.
The senior demographic, I mean, it's kind of a joke that I say that I think Aspen should be proud of, that in most emergency departments, if you have 3 90-year-olds side by side in the ER, they all came from a nursing home. Here, 2 of them crashed their e-bikes. And that's kind of cool. You got people, they're not sitting at home on the couch, they're out doing stuff, but they get hurt. And that has had a big impact, is the aging population.
I've heard that pickleball is actually a really dangerous new sport.
Yeah.
For seniors.
It's
Ankle twister.
the worst neck fracture I ever saw was a pickleball player.
Right, see? Yeah.
Oh, my God. I knew there was a reason I didn't play.
Thank you for that. It's interesting looking through this. And I don't have any questions, but thank you for preparing that. So my question is for Connie. Have you got the money in the budget, and where is it coming from?
So the impact for 2023 would be about $64,000. There are some one-time initial setup costs, and then about half the salary. We're estimating salary and benefits around $124,000. There will be an offset in what's budgeted for other on-call salaries, and conservatively estimating that at $40,000.
Savings of $40,000.
Savings.
Right.
It could be certainly more than that.
Can I ask one last thing on the recommended action? Is request for the conversion of a part-time coroner position to full-time, and approve the hiring of a lead investigator for the office. That's is that, sounds like two
The
positions.
same,
That's,
it's the same
that's the
person.
same.
Okay.
The same.
We just have
Just
to give
wanted,
them
the
a
way it
title.
was written, I was thinking, okay, where's the second one? Thank you, Patty.
Yeah, you know, I have to say this. I'm not a big fan of more FTEs. I'm not a big fan of them coming back to us outside the budget process. But this only makes sense, and I think the savings with overtime and mental health issues for people and stress is definitely worth it. And I see that going forward in years future. It's not just a savings for this year. We're gonna be saving that overtime, et cetera, next year. For someone who's gonna just make the department run smoother and help you with the backlog of things, and just prepare us for what the changes we may see moving forward if this trend continues with our visitors, our demographics, our pickleball players, et cetera. I made it clear I don't like FTs and I don't like them coming outside the budget. I think this one makes great sense. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Thanks.
And then next time, as this continues to be an issue, we look to the sheriff, who we learned was a coroner, a deputy coroner, so I'm going to volunteer him for a number of hours a week.
Thank you.
Might be a conflict of interest.
Oh, that, okay.
We are the only county in the state where it's legal to be a coroner's officer and a sheriff's officer.
Oh.
Interestingly enough, it's an old.
You're still
piece
on the hook.
Yeah, and I think Michael coming to give us moral support because he's been there. He's
I've been
seen-
there. I've been on that
he knows-
on-call
yeah.
calendar of, at one point there was 2 of us and we're doing 2 weeks out of the
Yeah.
month and it's a lot.
The technical, the legal issue is that the coroner can actually arrest the sheriff. Is that right? So if he's
Yeah,
the
we've
both
talked
the-
about that. I get a $20 bill once a week. So.
So
I told
do I
him-
have you on speed dial?
We'll never have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Really? You can arrest him?
It's part of the old laws. Like if there's a county warrant issued for the sheriff, the coroner has to serve it and run the jail and sheriff's office until the commissioners fix the problem
Oh my
with an
God.
election or a appointment or something.
And it
So-
has
I'm glad
happened.
that, I'm glad that
Uray
law
County.
exists.
It
Yeah.
happened.
I'm-
Where
It
it happened
Right.
not too long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Didn't it
So
happen in
Watch
Uray?
yourself, Michael.
Pretty
Nose clean.
I'm happy to hear that it leaves us out of the loop, that we don't have to arrest him and run the jail and the sheriff's
Oh,
office.
sorry.
Pretty sure it's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, I don't think it's
Yeah.
going to be an issue.
We'll move on. Okay. Steve has his hand up, then Kelly, and then we're gonna move on if
I think we're,
I think we're in favor. I'm in
You
favor of
guys.
this. So, but Steve, go ahead.
Thank you. I fully support adding this position right now. It totally makes sense to me, both financial and in terms of keeping helping to prevent burnout of the other people who are working at this. And maybe we'll be able to retain more of the part-time people because they won't feel overloaded so much. Also, the fact that Garfield County has aided us in, lending their person on a as-needed basis. I think I would love to be in the position that we could participate in the mutual aid by offering help to another county who, has a need for an extra coroner on a short-term basis.
That's a good
being
point. I
good
think
neighbor,
Audra
and
has
that's
already
really
done that.
That's something I'd love to be able to offer that service to other counties too.
so Steve, does that include that our coroner can arrest the Garfield County Sheriff?
No, thank gosh.
Yeah,
Thank
I would
goodness.
hope so.
No,
Thanks,
and what
Steve.
you mentioned, actually, Audra's already been able to help Rob Glassmeyer a couple days in Garfield, right?
We had the plan to do that, and they ended up canceling because of something on their end. But
But it's not unusual at all for Eagle County to ask us for mutual aid because of that stretch of Eagle
here.
County and Basalt up to Rudai. Whenever, they have never asked us when we've said no. And vice versa. They've helped us in that, up in Rudai a couple times. But it is, and we'll be able to offer a little bit more of that help when we're adequately staffed.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you
Kelly
for
Kelly
having
has
us.
one more.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate all your work, and I appreciate the statistics, because we don't really get this information about, and I think it's important to understand, like, for public health and all sorts of things. I will say, I also do not like these positions coming mid-year, and Michael, this is 2 now, so I don't want you
Oh,
to get very used
Good
to
thing we brought you.
Because I don't love it, but I recognize the opportunity here to bring on someone that's qualified. That is not easy to do in your position, so I'll support it despite those reservations.
Okay.
And I will just give a little feedback. I just had heard, I had one constituent reach out with some concern related to notifications of deaths. I think it was related to Jim Crown's, death. And the feedback that was given to me was, wouldn't it be nice for the family to have a day to process this before this information goes out publicly? So I don't know how those decisions get made, and I know it's a very high-profile situation for your office to deal with, but I just wanted to pass that feedback along.
And good feedback. We've learned a few things from that case, and Audra and I both have been in pretty constant, every few day contact with the family attorney and their family media representative, and we're on the same page going forward. And we learned some things from that case. So. Always want that feedback, and anytime call either one of us directly if there's something we can do to alleviate anybody's pain or grief at the time. Because I would say that our most important job, it's not about the dead, it's about the living, and for 100 different reasons. And so we're always available to do that. So.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. We've got, what do you need from us?
That is it.
Vicon?
We will include the budget adjustments in the third quarter supplementals, so you'll see that circling back around. And do know that we may have some requests coming up in the 2024 budget also. The coroner's office has operated out of the good graces of Aspen Valley Hospital with no meeting space of their own, no facilities of their own, no storage of their own. And right now, it's still working. There may be some point in the future where we need to make some changes as we're becoming more modern.
So does Steve want us to build him a new building?
No, that is certainly not an ask right now.
We can move you into the third floor because everybody else is up there with us, right, John?
But just a little teaser, a heads up that as we bring on another person and are developing and working on things, in the future there could be some other requests coming. As you know, Aspen used to operate on more of the handshake basis, and that's worked for the coroner's office, but it may not always work in future years.
Right, understood. Well, thank you.
All right, thank you
Thanks,
for your
guys.
time.
Good to see you.
Appreciate you coming in.
Thank
Thanks for the
you.
presentation. Okay, I have got teed up here. We have prep for the joint meeting. John, are you ready for this?
Almost.
Could I might do a open discussion item while the sheriff is here?
Sure,
Oh, no,
if
I
you'd
thought
like.
Excuse me,
Michael,
pardon me,
stick around for a
Sheriff, do you
sec.
have just 1 minute?
We have an open discussion request from Kelly.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to bring up, I noticed there are signs for construction over Independence Pass starting next Monday.
I'm glad you brought
and
that
I
up.
wonder if there's
I thought it already started.
information to
I
cover.
think the 17th.
Yeah, it said the 17th.
I forwarded that information, and we're going to, hopefully we have it out already, if not soon, out on social media. And that's probably the best we can do.
What's the,
Time frame.
yeah,
Start in
what
the
are they
morning,
doing?
end in
What's
the
the
Chip
time frame? How
sealing
does it
from
affect
mile
people?
marker, I forget exactly what it is, but it's going to be, down to one lane for, I think they said 10 minutes. I think it's going to be greater than that at some point.
What time in the morning are they going to start?
It's like 7 to 7:30.
I need to go over the pass, so I was thinking, how early do I want to get
You
over?
get over before 7, I would say.
Of course, I'm going on the
Going
19th.
for
today.
how many weeks?
Quite a period of
I
time.
forget what their release said. It's
It's
a
a
month
pretty
or so.
good stretch.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, good question, because I thought it had already happened. The other day, the traffic going over the pass was backed all the way down Main Street.
Was that when I-70 was closed?
I think it was
I-70 closed,
Saturday.
yeah.
Oh, but there was also an accident or something, because I saw a state trooper whipping through town.
Yeah.
So there was a combination. I thought, they're doing construction up there on a Saturday?
No, this is a Monday through Friday. I forget the exact hours. They're stretching out the days
Yeah.
to make the project shorter. But yeah, we're trying to get everything out on social media. I don't know if the local papers or if CDOT took out ads in the local papers or not, but that'd be great.
Yeah, we need to do that. I'm just have to plan to leave early.
Yeah.
Okay, well, happy to
Take my
let
time.
everybody know.
Yeah.
So thank you for.
You bet. Thank you.
For that, and
Thanks.
thank you for
Thank you.
indulging. Greg.
Thank you. Okay. All right, we're teed up for our joint meeting on housing prep with the city. I see it's going to be on the 18th from 9:30 to 10 a.m. There's no location listed. Is this one of these
9:30 to
things?
4, not 9:30
Yeah, it's
to 10.
9:30 to
Oh, sorry.
to 4.
yeah,
That's
sorry.
just
No, I'm
the
looking at
start.
I'm just looking at the coffee, period. It's all day, right?
There's no end time
You can
on
drink
this.
coffee all day too.
Well, it's all up to you guys.
So it's 9:30 to 10.
But we're not divulging the location yet.
Yeah, so it's going to be at the Meadows, and we will get this is a draft agenda, so we'll try and post with the information, the location information on there. But it will be at the Meadows. We are going to have Stephanie Zaza in to help moderate the conversation. I know we've had good sessions with her at EOTC and such in the past, and she's used to working with both bodies. Just kind of want to walk through how the day is structured in a little bit more detail than the agenda you have in front of you, and kind of tee up some of the conversation opportunities that we're anticipating. This was worked on with city staff and just information that we got from elected officials and council and then Francie and Greg. And so 9:30 to 10, we'll have some coffee and snacks out. That's an opportunity to gather. We are going to have a hard 10 o'clock start, so really want to make sure folks are there. The city is hosting, so it'll kick off with Tori giving some comments, and then we're going to ask Francie to give comments. Greg, if for some reason Francie cannot be there, given that we don't know how mobile she'll be by that point next week. We may ask you to do that so you and I can visit about that on Thursday during our agenda meeting. We have some ideas there. The meeting will get handed over to Stephanie at that point. We're going to be asking each of you to just briefly kind of talk about what your interest is. I know you love those exercises, Patty, but just so we get a sense around the table of where folks are at with the affordable housing, like what's bringing you to the table, what's your interest in the topic, just as kind of a level setting opportunity. Sarah and I will then give an opening. Sarah, with the city hosting, Sarah's going to take lead on that. I will say I'm a little iffy on if I'm going to be able to be there in person because of my dad's situation right now and whether I'll be back. They're looking to discharge him into hospice at some point this next week. So I will keep you all posted on my availability.
Right. We understand and encourage you to take all the time you need.
Thank you. So, it's really, what we're trying to tee up is how do we have a conversation with each other about our opportunities to partner going forward. After that introduction, going to do just a quick kind of section of the agenda and where we've been, and we're going to watch John McBride's 2008 video on affordable housing, and I think we'll see that a lot of the themes remain the same. Basically.
Same as 1908.
It's 2008, 2008, yeah. And then, we're really going to be talking about the agenda in kind of a similar way that it was framed up for you today. What are our opportunities to not lose what we have? How do we maintain community in the face of growth pressures? That is a conversation that we have. How are we going to move forward, to address issues? And then with that framing, Ashley is going to do a brief data presentation, just some level setting about need and such. There'll be some data that you all have seen before, but just to get everyone on the same page, that first rung on the ladder. The city is going to do a brief presentation on capital reserve shortfalls, and there's going to be conversation, moderated conversation around each of these. We'll break for lunch. We're going to have a very quick break, about half hour. We're not wanting folks to necessarily leave because it's hard to get everyone back. But we'll have a half-hour break to grab lunch, break bread together. And then we're going to provide a presentation to a lot for council's benefit on our growth committee recommendations on affordable housing, which will give us an opportunity to start to have those discussions about where. I know that's been a conversation that we've been wanting to have. What are the opportunities to partner? Where can we do this inside the urban growth boundary, outside the urban growth boundary? What does partnering on density look like? It's starting to get some of those conversations on the table. And then we're going to really pivot to a broader discussion to wrap up the day about, what are some other tactics or areas of collaboration or prioritization? We listed some out today at a very high level. What are some of those opportunities that we see? Diane and Ashley will be given a brief, presentation on some of those opportunities, but that's really going to be mostly a conversation that's moderated between the two bodies. Like, how can we work together? What are those areas right now, even without us necessarily having an immediate funding source? There's a lot of opportunities for us to work together still. And so looking for where y'all can reach some areas of agreement and areas that you want to explore more. And we will wrap up. That'll be a full day. So that's the kind of planned flow for the day at this point.
Greg, can I?
Please,
Could I have a little, I'm going to look at Kara and Ashley, just if they could just send us before the meeting on Tuesday, just a little excerpt or something from the growth management recommendations as to the specifics of their housing. I mean, I could go through the whole volume, but yes, I have a feeling you guys can put your finger on it better than I.
So just so you all know, we are going to put, I should remember which addendum it is. So we're going to put the growth recommendations, that addendum, directly into the packet for the joint meeting. So council has it as well, and you'll have it. And then we'll just do the hyperlink to the full 70-page report.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
So, so we have coordinated with city staff so that we will have the same packet materials for both bodies, and it'll be probably pretty robust packet at this point. And comes out tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. We're trying to get it out a little.
What's tomorrow?
I know. We're trying to get it out a little early.
Oh, good. Okay, so I can print it because I have to. I'll pick and choose when I want to print, but I like to have it in front of me.
But I think this should give us an opportunity to have the conversations I've heard, the board wants to have around growth and location and opportunities to partner at multiple levels with the city.
Who will all be there? Who's invited?
Right now, it is the council, the board. From staff here, it will be the three of us. And then on city staff, I think it'll be Sarah, Diane, Liz, and Matthew Gillen from APSHA.
Got it. Are there any other community members participating?
It is a public meeting, and so folks are welcome to come, but we have not scheduled any time specifically for that.
Anyone from West Mountain Housing?
I was just thinking.
Okay. But that's, okay. Nobody else, okay.
I think the APSHA board might have been invited, but I don't remember.
Yeah, it seems to me that this might be an opportunity to pull in, or at least invite interested parties to come and listen in and maybe generate some inspiration. You know,
You mean like public comment? If they
not
were-
public comment so much, but just to be there. Like, do they know we're doing this?
It'll be posted. It's certainly not something we've advertised as, you know, it's not intended necessarily as a public presentation or forum, and so we didn't want to set up that expectation. The facility itself is going to be that oval
Round table,
room.
right.
Yeah, so
Yeah, at Betcher.
it'll be somewhat better. Yeah, it's somewhat limited in
Got
terms
it.
of
But if
seating
somebody wanted
space.
to come and listen in, they could.
They absolutely could,
Got it.
and it was really set up as an opportunity for the city council and board of county commissioners to really have some significant time on this issue together.
Right, okay. I certainly support this and looking forward to it, plan to be there. As you may have noticed, I have this longing to try to pull more people from the community into the conversation. And that includes, and I'm thinking specifically partners, people with money, people with land, people who have an interest, whether it's for their employees or for the benefit of the community, who might be out there wondering how they can participate and wondering what we can make available to them to help make it work from the city and the county. So it seems to me that this is an opportunity, and I certainly would love to, you know, I'll float it out there and see if anybody shows up. And that's another question I have. If we held a meeting about housing, who's going to show up, and what do they expect from us, and what can we expect from them?
Well, and again, we've set it up more as a conversation between the two bodies, because you really haven't had that forum yet versus a public discussion where we're inviting a lot more players to the table.
That
We
might be
thought,
a future date.
And I mean, the housing summit in March served, I think, that purpose broadly for the community.
Right.
You know,
So
there's
this is the
still
next
some
step.
follow-up envisioned from that I'm not sure where that is at with
It
Habitat.
would
but-
seem obvious to me this would be follow-up to something like that, or at least tangential, complementary, you know. So that's where I am. Okay.
so any,
Can't wait.
I'm curious as to the data. What data should we expect to hear?
we're gonna try and keep it brief and high level because we want to give you all time to talk. But Ashley, what will we expect to see?
It will be a short data presentation with a facilitated discussion. So a little bit about the need around jobs in the county. We're going to try and break some job data down via city versus county. Just kind of like what the need is. And then we're going to do some heat mapping and some visuals around what the supply is. It's really just a framing of the issue so that you all can go in with this, like with a shared understanding of kind of the problem.
Is that called problem identification?
I think, no, we were told not to do that. So that's where we're aiming. I mean, it's part of the framing of the agenda, so it'll be a short segment. Is there something specific you're hoping will show up?
I'm just wondering if I wouldn't be surprised if questions related to like inventory mix and, you know, income categories or whatever comes up. Like, what is the need related to category 1 versus category 3, or, you know, something like that.
Rental versus ownership.
It's great. And we'll have,
Because, I mean, really, this, like, we are in a position to like determine those things. Like those come to APSHA a lot. Like, do we change these categories? Do we, and I feel like the city and the county should have sort of more knowledge about what the need is, what the spread is, so that we're not just making those choices like in the dark.
Great. I can certainly include that. The data we have will all come from APSHA,
yeah.
but I can certainly include a slide or two about that in what we currently have, and then how that dictates because you will get to decide what the need
right?
is,
Like
but
that
yeah.
can like the city and the county can make that decision to change that. Like if we decided, oh, we want this whole complex to go to category something, you could do that over time.
Right.
But yeah. Anyway.
Can we ask
play with
housing
that
go to both people who work in the city and work in unincorporated Pickens County?
Regarding inventory, do we have people always ask me, well, just how much housing is there in the entire community, including APSHA, including various business-owned, snowmass, hospitals, schools, like, do we have that number at our fingertips?
We're going to have that number in August. So the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition received a $100,000 grant from the state, and we're doing a 4-part project where we have a team of consultants, and one of the 4 pieces is an existing build out, so like what exists now, and then looking at what's kind of permitted and approved and will be built in the next 5 years. So we'll have a 5-year build out scenario as well, within categories, and as much as we can do that. So I think that goes to, the question of like what exists now, and then a lot of folks driving up and down Valley say, well, I see so much construction, are we going to have enough in 5 years? And really shining some light on just what percentage of that new housing that we're seeing go up is actually quote unquote affordable.
That'll come to us in August.
Yeah, along with some other really interesting data that the coalition's pulled together.
That's great. That's great. I think the regional coalition is a really great place to house that information and potentially act as a supplier of opportunities as well in the future. There was something else. Should we put discussion of opting into Prop 123 onto our agenda? Because I do feel like that is something that will require joint conversation.
I agree that it will require joint conversation. Staff is not at a point of understanding Prop 123 enough to bring it forward, but we did get in the memo for my previous presentation today, I mentioned that we had jointly applied with City of Aspen, Town of Snowmass Village, and Town of Basalt for a technical assistance grant for us to understand Prop 123. We did get accepted into that grant. I found out on Friday. So we'll be getting experts from the state walking us through exactly what it would take for us to sign on to a Prop 123 commitment, what funds would be available, what the AMIs are and what the usage requirements would be around those funds, and then we'll jointly bring that back to all the various entities. I had thought upon reading the legislation that we'd be able to make that commitment jointly, but it turns out we will all actually have to make the commitment on our own. And then if we end up building something, we can retroactively kind of claim it for multiple entities. So that legislative change didn't improve it as much as I thought at first blush.
I guess I would say my understanding is that there's the process for the land banking funding is either open or going to be open soon, and I would hate for us to miss that opportunity if we don't take this administrative step.
Yeah.
And I'm not totally clear on that, but that's what my understanding is what's happening right now, and that seems like that would be a very important piece for our community to engage on.
I will note that they're going to move very quickly on the technical assistance, so I'm hoping within like 6 weeks we'll be able to come back to you all and say here's what it is, and then you can make the decision of whether we commit or not. But to your previous question, we are not prepared as staff to speak jointly at the joint meeting next week. Because it's just a tricky one to understand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from anybody else? I think looks good. Steve has a question.
Anytime we're talking about affordable housing stuff, I think transportation issues could end up being part of that discussion. So we should be thinking along the lines of having, transit or multimodal kind of transportation opportunities from projects that we're talking about with the city of Aspen. And I don't want that to be the centerpiece of this discussion, but it probably will be a collateral part of the discussion.
Thanks, Steve. Duly noted. I appreciate that. Okay, I
Was
think
it at Dorhosier somewhere?
the Betcher building, which is near the,
Or is it Betcher? That's a different part of the.
next to behind Pepke, right?
That is it.
Yeah. We'll get you the exact meeting room because, the city had set that up, and so I want to double
Yeah,
check.
because you don't want to go to one side and it's on the other side.
It is a beautiful walk, though.
But if you
Right,
want
it's
us
a nice
there on
walk.
time and ready to go, forget it.
Yeah.
There should be WeCycle station right next to it too, I
Yep,
think.
there is. There's
Well,
one here, there.
yeah.
I just want to know how to escape, because you can go down the hill to the river to the Rio Grande and come back up. There's a little path down there.
Oh, to
It's like
go from
this.
one to
I
the
run
other.
that
Yeah,
little.
it's pretty cool.
Okay, if that's it, then we're going to finish this conversation ahead of schedule, and we can go to review of future agendas, if that's where we are.
Excuse me.
Future agenda review.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ashley.
Appreciate your work on
Thanks,
it.
Kara.
So, don't have a whole lot. We do have the meeting on the 13th with the treasurer, and we do not have a confirmed time, so we'll try and get that confirmed tomorrow. He had asked for 45 minutes on the 13th. We're expecting to have details for you today.
It's just
and we didn't-
Thursday afternoon. I had it down at over at the police department in the afternoon.
Yeah, and so I want to confirm those details, so I'll ask Lanny to track those down. Otherwise, I do not have any other future agenda items for you at this time.
Great.
Okay, Patty?
I had a few things, but Kelly has, I was concerned that we were going to have the ballot question for housing on it, but Kelly is going to be able to zoom in, so just want to make sure she was there for that.
I will.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and so the other one is on the 26th. Are you guys going to be able to zoom in for the STR conversation about Redstone? Because right now, Francie's hoping to either be here or zoom in. It's on our regular agenda, first reading.
It's a second reading, it looks like, for.
That's it, yeah, are we having first reading tomorrow? Yeah, second reading. And also, I think we should let staff know, or applicant know, because I think Glenn Horn has the Willoughby application on that day. And I'm not sure which board members will be in attendance or not. It might only be 3 of us.
I'm planning to be here.
You are, because you're marked out.
I'm marked out, but I don't think I'm leaving now, but I,
That's the
26th.
yeah.
And then I'm going to be out of town from the 3rd and back on the 14th, but I may not be back at the meeting on the 15th. It depends on when Tommy's discharged from Heritage. I can't put him on the bus.
Yeah,
Oh.
I mean, I will plan to be popping in and out.
Okay.
I'm not committing to the full
From New Jersey.
meeting, but I
Okay.
will join for hot topics, including, I will join for the STRs, and I will join for the property tax relief program and grant funding.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure you weren't getting left out of that one.
I appreciate it.
That's all I had. Thanks.
Thanks, Patty. Okay.
See how good of a babysitter my dad, Pop-Up is.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on to open discussion. What other open discussion?
I just wanted to note for the board pursuant to open discussion in our last meeting that we did submit 2 legislative issue forms to CCI. One is very familiar. We did RET again, and pretty much the same write-up and arguments that we've done in the past. We did a more general write-up on property tax equity, which really is targeting the tax uniformity requirements in Tabor also. So we have really two Tabor issues, but they're discrete Tabor issues. And the ask is really, at this point, broad. It's something that the board can narrow down. I think our hope is to get this on the radar screen for this year. But it would, allow local control to exempt certain levels of either property value from assessment, or to expand the property types that may be considered for differentials in assessment rates. So for example, vacant versus resident occupied homes, or STR versus not, but it's really a local control question. The other way you could look at it is, do you look at when you approve a tax or for a specific jurisdiction that you can exempt a certain amount, almost like a standard deduction on your federal taxes of assessed or market value, so that you're able to make what may turn into a regressive tax program into a more progressive or neutral kind of tax program. So we didn't identify in this case a specific solution, but more local control around being able to use these types of tools at this point. So just wanted to make the board aware of that.
So there's a meeting, I think, to present on these on Friday. Is staff going to present on that one?
Well, I think we should talk about, it was not clear to me if any board members were going to be in attendance at the CCI. Steve, are you going to be in attendance? And then would you like?
No, I am going to be at Club 20 meeting in Pagosa Springs. However, that meeting ends around noon, and our part is the tax and finances towards the end of the 9 to 3 meeting. So depending on how fast they go through the presentations on the other issues, and there are 25 issues so far on the CCI list, I might or might not be able to present, but if Kelly, I don't know what you're up to, Kelly, but if you could commit to that, then I would try to attend, but I can't commit to it right now.
Yeah. I am free until 2:30, and then I'm not. So I can watch this.
And I can free up if you want staff to be there for presentation.
Okay.
I'm out of pocket on Friday.
I have to be honest, I think this second priority, the RET, will probably get more traction because we've done it for so long. I have a feeling the second one will have a similar kind of trajectory of maybe a couple years.
Well, and there is other things at work. Like I gotta get my ducks in a row a little bit on this, but like I think they were setting up a task force to look at like resident versus non-resident taxation as part. So like the state's already sort of undergoing some of that analysis, or has committed to undergoing some of that analysis. So I could just see that being a bit of a response. And then I haven't read Summit County's proposal, but they have submitted a proposal related to rebate authority. Tax rebate authorities, so there might be some overlap in those two areas with our proposal. But we should connect just so I can get my ducks in a row on that. And then I was wondering, related to the RET, I wonder if we should explore a RET fee. Similarly to
Thinking about that last night, or an assessment.
What was
proposed at the state?
Yeah, because it went to the Supreme Court, analyzed the ballot language and approved it for submittal for signatures. So they didn't like flat out reject the idea
Of
as
the
being
RET or
illegal.
the fee?
The RET fee. And so I'm just wondering, so what does that, like, does that mean we could pursue that locally if we went to the voters, or, I don't know.
So it may be worth consulting. I think Dee Weiser had worked on that, and Dee has certainly done a lot of work around Tabor and the questions of fees and taxes. And if the board wants staff to explore that, it may be worth outreach to him to understand how that was structured and how it applies, and we can bring that back.
Yeah, I just wonder if
great
they
idea.
were going to let that go to the vote at the state level, is that
Could we
something
do
we
it
could bring
here?
to a vote
Yeah,
at the local
yeah.
level? It'd be nice to have
I
clarity.
think we
on
might
those
be able to do
options.
that. I think that might be a great idea.
Yeah.
Local control.
Okay.
I have one, go ahead.
Yeah, and I had reached out to Dee about that at one point, and we had tried to touch base, and we did not, but he's more than willing to talk to us about it, so I'll reach out again.
I'd be willing to be part of that.
Okay, Patty?
Yeah, just Greg, actually, to give you a heads up, because you'll be running the meeting tomorrow, and John, did we send a thing on to Deb and Jeanette that Deb and Jeanette are going to be coming to our meeting tomorrow, Deb Famesberger and Jeanette Jones.
Right at 12.
Yeah, they said 12:30, and I said, no, they need to be here at 12, because if we're already in the middle of something at 12:30, we don't want to interrupt the regular meeting, just to ask for our consent to extend the time frame for the appeals hearings.
For BOE, right.
Yeah. Okay, just want to make sure you knew, Greg.
Yep, thank you.
Great, thanks.
And then I think, was Rye noticing an exec for tomorrow?
That is my understanding
11,
for 11 o'clock.
It shouldn't take long,
Yeah.
in my understanding, because we do probably need to have a break to grab something to eat before we start the length. Yeah, Carrie,
Sorry,
you're
we're
saying
gonna
Make
yes?
sure we've got it. Yeah, just to make
I
sure we all know when
I
to
haven't
show
seen
up.
anything come back through. My brother-in-law just got out of surgery. I'm like, God. On his birthday. Francie, we haven't heard anything. I saw her yesterday.
Where was she having surgery?
Greg, I think Steve is trying to jump in on open
Oh,
discussion.
Steve, sorry.
I
Go
don't
ahead.
know.
Well, I've got a couple of things that, just to put them on the table. They're both citizen concerns about activities on adjoining properties. One being the distillery at Oakland Ranch, and the neighbors there had some concerns about a couple of different things. One being the location of the solar panels that on what was supposed to be farm ground, apparently a couple of acres of ground, they said they were going to be growing, using the water rights and growing crops of some kind on there. And then the other being stuff about the fire code and the sprinkler systems at that location. So that was the concern from citizens, and I presume all of you got the letters from those
John?
those people. It was about a week ago or so.
Yeah, Greg, staff's already on it. They're already working on those issues, and John Maley, from the Roaring Fork Fire District, has already spoken with them, so it's in process. That's why it's my understanding that's why the continuation for tomorrow of this issue, their annual update, because there's other outstanding issues. So staff is already working on that, and there's nothing we need to do at this time, is my understanding.
Okay. The other one is on Lower Snowmass Creek Road, and it's a residence where the owner is apparently using it as a staging area for his employees to meet and go out on landscaping projects. I've noticed a bunch of pickup trucks and cars parked there. They have very adequate parking for the number of vehicles. But then the next door neighbor complained about the noise and the activity. I guess they must have some work trucks leaving from there to go to different job sites every day. And I've just become aware of this. The letter I asked Charlotte to forward to all of you, the letter is from Kathy DeWolf, who's the next door neighbor. So I think that's something that
I didn't get it.
probably should be looked into. It is
it's
like
not
a
here right now.
home-based business. My wife Molly has run a landscaping business out of our house where she keeps her tools here and she goes off and does jobs. So it's sort of a similar thing to that, but on a much larger scale. So I think it merits looking at and maybe taking some action or communication with the owner of the business and the guy who owns the house.
I didn't see any letter come through on it,
Yeah,
Steve.
I haven't seen a letter either. I'm just wondering, but is that something that has to come to the BOCC level to be investigated?
No. Staff.
Well, I would think it might be a ComDev investigation or perhaps advice from our attorney on or from the zoning enforcement officer might be the person that we need to check in with.
We haven't seen the letter, so I can't comment.
Okay, and it was yesterday I asked Charlotte to forward it to everybody.
She's
but
out of town
apparently-
for 2 weeks, Steve.
Oh, okay, that explains that. Well, I will get that forwarded to all of you through, through another channel besides
Yeah,
Charlotte
just
then.
send it to BOCC and maybe we can revisit tomorrow after
Okay.
we've read it. Is that okay?
But he can't send
Great.
it to all of us, so,
Just the BOCC email.
yeah, or just send it through Laney or somebody. that can
Okay,
send it.
I'll
thanks.
send it through Laney.
Great, thank you, Steve. Rise here to talk to us about executive session possible.
Yeah, I was hoping to get that scheduled, but we weren't able to get anything noticed for before the meeting tomorrow. And it looks like you guys are, most of you are out of here for the AVLT event at the end of the day tomorrow. So I don't know if, or some of you are.
Greg, are you
I'm
going?
going to that,
I'm
yeah.
going.
So, I don't know if there'll be time at the end of the meeting tomorrow, and
I'm out of here.
otherwise we'll have to find another time to
Yeah,
do
we
it.
have a few land use items.
Yeah, it looks
Are
like you
you-
guys have a pretty packed agenda tomorrow.
Right, so we probably
I
shouldn't.
wouldn't plan on it for tomorrow unless you really think we can, I'll be here.
I'll be here.
Well, I hear it's short.
Well, it could be. I mean.
Yeah, I was wishful
I
thinking
think,
maybe. I might.
Dale will probably be around the county. If you guys get done early, you all can always move to go into exec at the end of the meeting. If it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen.
Well, maybe we just play it that way, as
Well,
long as
depends
we
if our
remind
meeting's
me.
at 7 o'clock and gets over. I'm not missing dinner. I'm sorry.
Well, just remind me when he's here, and we'll
We
see
can-
how it goes.
I just talked to Dale and I was discussing it with him. We can find another time to do it with you all.
God,
So-
if there's a sense of urgency, I don't want to miss that. I'll.
There is, but you don't need to make a decision tomorrow.
Oh, got it, okay, all right. All right then.
Thanks for
Thanks for that. So our plan right now is to be here at noon,
Thought you go.
correct? Yeah.
I have
yes.
another open
Oh,
discussion.
Kelly, go ahead.
Sorry if this was discussed in other open discussions and I'm just forgetting, but we received a letter on June 20th requesting our support for dark skies designation by the Snowmass Capitol Creek Caucus. I think we all received it, so I'd be happy to support their efforts for a dark sky designation, and I wonder how the rest of the board feels.
I think we've pretty much got most of the stuff in dark skies covered by our land use code. But if they want to pursue it, I heard it's a
Are
lengthy
pursuing it.
process and it's not cheap.
And they've asked for our letter of support, and they're already working with Larissa and ComDev.
Yeah, it's funny, for some reason I thought this is something we had already done, and we were so close to it that it wasn't really necessary. But I certainly support it, and I'd love to, but I'm not sure what do we need to do?
Yes, I think the discussion went maybe a little bit different directions. I think, Kelly, what you're saying is the board did not make a decision on a letter of support, and so that's a different question that more went to what our code is around dark skies. We are in the process of making some revisions. to that code, and that may be the conversation that's happening between the Snowmass Caucus and staff. And I know as that gets closer, we'll be bringing that back to the board for presentation. If Snowmass Caucus is making their own application, then a letter of support is certainly at the board's discretion. I think we just want to be sure that what we're committing to in terms of our code is consistent with where the board ends up wanting to go. But we certainly do have a robust
Yeah, and
night
I
sky.
think there's a funding mechanism to getting this designation, is my understanding. So I want to know if we do a letter of support, if they're going to be coming back and asking us to fund it. I mean,
I can't answer that.
I have questions. Don't necessarily not support it. I just think I need more information. You don't know? Or
And they've offered to do a presentation to us, if that is desirable.
I would
July
support
4th, August 4th.
I'd support a presentation if it's in the context of the entire county and not just snow cap. That doesn't make sense to me. I think it ought to be something we do across the entire county. And if they're working with ComDev and can make a presentation on the benefits and the value of doing it, then I would support that.
Unincorporated Pickens County, you're saying?
Yeah.
So, okay, so if it stops at Snowmass, they can have their lights on and.
Well, we can't really tell Snowmass what
I
to do,
know.
right? I'd love it to include Brush Creek Village.
Yeah, trespassing light.
So, Greg, I could fill you in, everybody in a little bit. They did make an application to the organization to be accepted as a member. They're hoping that other caucus areas across the county will be interested in joining in on, a bigger application covering more or all of the county. And I think that a letter of support from the county would just aid and give some more credibility to the application by one smaller part of the county.
So you're
And I
advocating
would
that
love to
we
have Martha and other people come in and do a presentation on that.
I think we did that when Dorothea was on the board.
It seems like it's been done, but I welcome it, and if they
I'll see
come
if
in.
Leslie remembers if it happened when she was here.
And
too.
if we can make it apply to the entire county, so much the better. Do you want to propose that, and then we can figure out a date?
Well, I
which
think
would
we need
be
to put it on an agenda, hear the thing, and then we can make a decision what we want to do.
Why don't we try and bring staff in to give you a quick update on where we're at with that? And we could probably try and find something even next week, just briefly, so you know what's happening with our discussions.
Next week, we have one meeting. That's with the city on Tuesday.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, the following work
week,
session. Thank
Following
you.
week, and that would include what they're doing, but also what their conversations with us are about, and where we are, right? Just so I'd love it to be a single conversation that covers the topic regarding the
Of dark
entire-
skies.
Yeah, not just for them, but
And if we're getting into a more major countywide issue, we'll just have to prioritize that with the growth management.
it's high on my list.
Another direction for you, John.
I thought we could just support this neighborhood and what they want to do, but,
Sure.
It sounds like they're
complicate it
But it's
more.
not enough.
Yeah, I think that we need to hear from staff and what staff's been doing.
Okay. We'll-
I don't mind hearing about it. I think it'd be
Yeah.
interesting, actually.
Sure. Is that all you needed? Okay, then. I think that it seems to me that
But tomorrow we're starting at noon, right?
starting at 12 tomorrow, and we're going to end as early as we can tomorrow, because some of us have an obligation we're signed up for to go to the AVLT dinner tomorrow night. All right.
Wait, Steve has
Last
his hand up.
announcement.
Go ahead, Steve.
Today is my granddaughter's first birthday.
Oh, my gosh,
congratulations.
congratulations.
So that's one reason I stayed at home to be here. That's also their last day. They're heading back to Alaska tomorrow, along with their wonderful dogs. Wonderful dogs.
Oh, I
If
thought
I
he
can
was
get
picking her up.
Cy up here.
Oh, sure, the dog
He's
gets
going
up.
back to Fairbanks
Dog's like,
tomorrow.
Are they leaving the baby with you and taking the dogs home?
No, I wouldn't mind if they would leave this dog here with me.
New best friend, huh?
Have a
Great.
good birthday party. Happy birthday to her.
Yeah, have fun. All right then, I think we're done. Thanks
Thank you,
everyone.
Russ.
We'll see you tomorrow at noon.